Ezra Zephyr stood like a man who was afraid of no one, the one who had the sheer will to defy the heavens and the one, gutsy enough to make the world bow before him. That's how the damaged genius of the upper realm thought when he saw the tall reddish werewolf in front of him, showing him his shiny sharp sword Efsa. The bluish armored youth was younger in age, despite his tall height, he was in his teenage. But, the age and martial prowess cannot define the ability of an individual. He was well trained and was raised for 1.5 decades for the sole purpose of conquering the lower realm. The martial spirit of his was not an 8th grade martial spirit, but a higher one that was restricted to the grade of 8th. Because the lower realm cannot control such a terrifying grade of martial spirit and might force the host to ascend before reaching the spiritual transformation stage. The legs of Carlo wobbled, but regardless of that, he stood up, showing his resolved character. His condition was very bad, the martial art technique of Ezra hit him cleanly, even leaving a shallow print on the armor. However, that was not the real cause of his heavy breathing and reeling mind. He was poisoned by Ezra, for a single second when his attention was tilted. Ezra managed to give a small scratch on his cheek with Dripa, and that small scratch was enough to trigger the ability of Dripa called Invade. The unknown, unidentified and incurable venom of Dripa slowly invades the body and uses the flow of blood to hit the nervous system, messing up the consciousness of the victim and killing his blood cells. The pace of the process depends upon the quality of the wound. The scratch was very small on Carlo's cheek, so the pace was very slow. Carlo was panting. "How did you get your hands on a martial art?" he asked once again as he tried to stabilize his breathing. "I created it." The Red Werewolf Prince replied in a monstrous voice. It was a myth, thinking that a werewolf can talk in his morph form, but that myth was proven right twice. First time in the cave by Mirza, and now in the Spirity Tower by Ezra, both father and son achieved what was deemed impossible. Carlo smiled bitterly. "Stop messing with me, you already won the fight, there's no need to hide," he said. Ezra chuckled as he found it funny, and replied, "Who do you think my martial spirit is?" Carlo suddenly got the answer that he desired. So Fenrir taught you." "Wrong, I created it." Ezra's words were loud and clear. After being quiet for quite a while, Carlo asked, "How did you make it?" "I was trained past my limits and reached a level where creating a martial art became as easy as creating a spell," he replied. Carlo's eyes widened. "You created a spell?" Ezra Zephyr nodded his large wolf head. "Haha, I believed I could easily shine in the lower realm. Haha, I wonder how will they react once they'll know about Fenrir." "They who?" asked Ezra. Carlo kept his smile as he replied, "Bunch of people who shouldn't be here." Ezra stepped forward as he scratched Efsa on Dripa and said, "I love riddles, but you don't have much time left, so let's cut to the chase and tell me, who are these shouldn't be here fellas that you mentioned?" 7 deadly sins, Carlo finished his answer with 3 words. Ezra paid no heed and asked Fenrir, "Who are they, Fenrir?" The monstrous wolf of Norse showed a worried look before replying. 7 martial spirits, which are more powerful than Raja Indarapatra. Ezra's eyes widened in curiosity. He wanted to ask more, but this was not a perfect time, so he asked Carlo another question. "Since when they are residing in Naran continent?" The man in blue armor shook his head. "Not in this continent, but in another called Bweta continent. They came 5 years ago with the same motive as ours. To prepare a large number of geniuses and soldiers for the Roman Dominion. They informed us because Roman Dominion and Las Filipinas Dominion are allies. They notified us to avoid conflicting with each other in the lower realm." Ezra Zephyr was shocked to hear this, and the shock grew when he saw an increasing surge of spiritual energy in Carlo Aur. He jumped back to prevent any possible shock, but soon, he understood what was happening and tightened his grip on both of his weapons. Carlo revealed his martial spirit. A mountain-sized man emerged out of him, black long curly hair bedecked his wide shoulders. His eyes glinted in nobility and his face was handsome. He wore the same armor that Carlo was wearing and also wielded the same Omaka Urumi sword around his waist. The infamous heroic prince who fought the man-eater in Lanao Lake, Raja Indarapatra, showed himself. Within the next moment, black lightning crackled and the thundering drumbeat resounded all over the woods. From the body of Ezra Zephyr, a towering black figure came out. The monstrous wolf of Norse came out, and both mythical figures looked at each other. "You still look the same," said Raja Indarapatra. "Martial spirits don't age, quit the naive blabber and answer me. Is what your host said true?" asked Fenrir. "Yes, it's true." Raja Indarapatra replied in a pleasant manner. His way of speech and voice sounded heroic, while the Fenrir sounded like a villain whose sole purpose is to cause destruction. "How come the upper realm is sending people all of a sudden?" Fenrir asked another question. "I am unaware, it's something only the Dominion rulers know about. But I came to know that many other dominions have found their way to the lower realm and are fighting over the conquest of it. The fertility rate here is a lot faster compared to the upper realm. If one nurtures the martial masters here and sends them to their dominion, imagine what would happen in a few centuries. Million of new geniuses and experts, to be used as pawns." Raja Indarapatra's face glowed as he said that. The wolf squinted his eyes. "What about Norse dominion?" "I don't know about them, they reside far away from us." Fenrir laughed. "Haha, yet you traveled all the way there to collude with them just to kill me." Raja Indarapatra laughed as well. "Haha, you were the biggest threat after all." Fenrir closed his eyes and nodded his head before saying, "Thank you for informing me." He opened his eyes and continued. "How would you like to die?" Raja Indarapatra smiled heroically and replied, "I won't die, but you will, and that's why I wanted to let you know all these things." He was confident. "And what if I manage to survive?" Fenrir inquired. "One of us will perish today. I am sure this is your last chance and you won't be able to resurrect your spirit, not unless you ascend to the upper realm. And if I lose, I will be devoured by you and there won't be any resurrection for me. So it's do or die for both. As for the information, I informed you because I admire you. Only you can make the upper realm panic at the thought of you." Fenrir scoffed. "Let's start." The spiritual energy started to surge from Carlo's body as he looked at Ezra Zephyr. "Ezra, let's try martial arts." "What's your martial art called?" "Art of Survival." The red werewolf replied. He created this art in the very last year of his training. He fought and trained for 4 years with unique and super rare geniuses. They all possessed their own martial arts. Spear, sword, gauntlets, daggers, axe hammer and a bow. He fought them with weapons and bare hands and eventually formed a martial art of his own. And he called it the art of survival because it was no trivial matter to survive against those puppets. Carlo laughed. "Very good, Whippy Blade versus Art of Survival. Let's see which one prevails." Ezra silently looked at him. He tried to call cover but failed. When Carlo activated his strangely powerful skill, Space Descent, he cut a portion of land and descended on the target. He used one of the commands of Fenrir's blessing spell. Ezra can easily exchange the position with his soldier whenever he wants. And he switched positions and got inside the black cell while Mad God Bear was buried beneath the giant land. He tried to call it back, but the pentagon formation couldn't be formed between the land. At that time, Carlo pressed his chest again, and Ezra's eyes widened. He knew whenever the former touched his chest, his power increased by folds. "I only have 2 more attacks left to play, after that, my body will fall," said Carlo. "I acknowledge you, and that is why I am apprising you that there are only 2 trump cards left in me. If you beat them, you will win." Carlo was smiling, despite the fact that his nose and eyes were bleeding. Dreepa's poison was eating him inside. Raja Indarapatra, unleash. Dro. A tsunami of spiritual energy was released from within the body of Carlo Aur as 10 robes rotated behind his back. "Ezra, this is my way of showing respect, now I can't seal my powers back. So even if I survive your atrocious poison, I cannot stay here and will go back to Las Filipinas. You successfully crumbled our plans." Ezra's eyes widened. 10 orbs. He murmured. That was the true grade of Raja Indarapatra, a martial spirit of 10th grade. He raised his sword and uttered, "Whippy blade, million whips." Drom. The dense spiritual energy tsunami merged around his sword. The Omaka's 3 blades became 6, 6 became 12, and 12 became 24. In front of Ezra Zephyr, the Urumi sword turned into millions of blades shining in grayish color. Ezra could only see the brilliance of it. He was not worried about the martial art but was troubled by the enormous amount of chi packed in those attacks. He dropped his both weapons, the sword Efsa and the hook Dripa. But before they could hit the ground, he held the glypnet and started to spin. Both weapons spun in the air as spirals. At that time Ezra used another technique of his martial art. Art of survival, deathly spirals. Both spirals were infused with black terrifying lightning and were vertically ready to slash whatever comes in their way. Soon, the swords of Carlo Aur were unleashed and millions of bright and shiny whips descended. The spirals moved and met the whips. Boom bom tha fea. Myriad of strange exploding sounds occurred and the spirals were destroyed by the sheer number of whips. Ezra growled and dashed into the woods. He moved with every bit of his energy. He waved his hands to block and parry as many whips as he could and used portal cutter multiple times. But the whips changed directions and hit him. After a long series of thrashing, the technique of Carlo ended. "I am impressed," said Carlo as he looked at Ezra Zephyr. His entire body was slashed and cut, there were thousands of small and large cuts, and his left eye was damaged as well. He panted heavily as he gazed at the blue-armored man raising his sword again. Whippy blade, 1 whip. BBZZZZZZZZZZ. The ground shook and his final and last move that his martial art contains emerged. All 3 blades of Urumi sword merged to become one and slashed at Ezra, emitting grayish chi. Ezra Zephyr saw that and tried to parry it. Art of survival, parry the mountain. Both his sword and hook moved in the union to parry the attack, but the spiritual energy difference was too much. Piata. A loud thrash and Ezra's left arm fell to the ground, blood oozing from it. His entire strength was crumbling as he fell to his knees. The same went for Carlo, he was on his knees as well. None of them had any power left to battle. "Haha, let us see, which one of us lasts long," said Carlo. Ezra Zephyr raised his bloody face and smiled as he murmured something. Carlo flinched but couldn't hear it. Kyrieri. A sudden cry reverberated. Carlo was traumatized as he looked behind. A shiny giant eagle came out of a pentagon portal. His jaw dropped as he said, "Third-tier martial animal." Kyrieri. A sudden cry reverberated. Carlo was traumatized as he looked behind. A shiny giant eagle came out of a pentagon portal. His jaw dropped as he said, "Third-tier martial animal." He slowly moved his head at his opposer, who was grinning, despite losing an arm of his. Ezra was losing a lot of blood. Black lightning continuously flickered to seal the arm and decrease the flow, but his spiritual energy was so low and his injuries were way bigger. Carlo became perturbed for a while, before nodding his head with a smile. "I accept my defeat, kill me." SWWISSSSHHH. A sharp whip-like thing brimming in myriad-colored light drifted at his neck and the head of Carlo Aur fell with a thudding sound. His head rolled and eventually halted, facing the heavily injured werewolf. Oddly, even after his death, his eyes were wide open, stalking his surprising opponent. That bird was none other than Razor Pearl Eagle, who was turned into an undead soldier by Ezra Zephyr inside the Spirity Bailiwick. What it used was its skill, slicing feather. Ezra was panting and grunting in pain at this moment. During the entire fight, their lives were on the verge of death many times. It was the battle of trump cards. The one who won was the one who had better and more hidden cards. Carlo's speed and power against Ezra's mastery in hand combat. Carlo's first seal and Ezra's bracers. Carlo's dimensional cutter was cancelled by Ezra's portal cutter. Carlo's second seal was tackled by Mad Godbear's summoning. Carlo's third seal versus Ezra's morphed werewolf form. Carlo's martial art was defended by Ezra's dragon pelt. Carlo's blue armor was faced by Ezra's martial arts. 10th grade Raja Indarapatra was endured by 7th grade Fenrir. Carlo's body, anguished with poison, raced against Ezra's blood-losing body. All this time, the cards, which were meant to cause huge upsets in battle, tackled each other to sheer evenness. But, at the very last moment, the Prince of Bloodfang Kingdom showed another card. The card of Razor Pearl Eagle, and to his foe's misfortune, he didn't have any card left to play. His body was poisoned and his spiritual energy was depleted. And that's how, the mighty genius, who was prepared to win the continent of the lower realm, perished. Ezra Zephyr paid a hefty price, his entire limb was dissected, and thousands of gashes exposed his flesh. His silver fangs were drenched in his very own blood, his eye was damaged to a point where he could never see from it again. In terms of physical appearance, Ezra looked worse than Carlo. However, he was smarter. It would take a huge amount of spiritual energy to revive Caver and force him out. So he kept Razor Pearl Eagle, who evolved from 2nd tier to 3rd tier after Ezra devoured those souls and martial spirits. If he had shown such an entity earlier, maybe Carlo could have used another measure, but he kept his main weapon hidden and waited for a perfect opportunity to unleash it. It takes a minuscule of spiritual energy to open the Pentagon portal, and that's what he did. The untouched, evolved, healthy and terrifying martial animal came out, and with a single move, the man this bird was tasked to kill was decapitated. It was a very close fight. If the poison of Dripa didn't have invaded his body, then he would have died long ago. Without him being known, Carlo's body was slowing down in a gradual manner. The battle finally ended, and the Prince of Werewolves raised his hand and uttered in a dim voice. Soul absorption. The whitish-colored circle was formed beneath the body of the late Carlo. Soon a ball of natural white emerged out of his body. It was a size that Ezra had never seen before. It came slowly and slowly until it reached his body and entered his chest. But he was not in a condition to refine and devour it, so he kept it inside his body. Next was the turn of Fenrir. He lurched out and licked his fangs. Seeing that the martial spirit of Carlo Aur also came out, the grievance was visible on his face as he looked down at his dead host and only disciple. Who would have thought that I'll die in the lower realm? He sighed as he said. Every essayer wishing to earn the price of conquest must be prepared to pay a likewise penalty of failure. You were once the hero of a mythical land, people deemed you an honorable person. Yet you colluded with the rest and tried to control everything. Why do you all fight for supremacy? I was loyal to Odin, but still, I was imprisoned. For what? Just because I was exceptionally strong. I was his grandson. Even if Loki was adopted, he was still his son, and I, a grandson. Your lame and evil sense of justification is hypocritical. Fenrir uttered in rage and sorrow. Raja Indarapatra silently listened to everything, and once Fenrir stopped his speech, he replied. I'm not corrupted, I was following my ruler, my god. I am not but a martial spirit. The main characters of this world are hosts, not as spirits. Sigh, let's not waste time on idle chatter, O monstrous wolf of Norse. Devour me, and let me see with your eyes the world you and your host will create. With honor, replied Fenrir as he opened his pitch-black whole mouth. Raja Indarapatra went inside it without any effort. Black lightning bolts flickered for a moment as it was about to be refined. Suddenly, the silent entity spoke. Winner of 2nd round is Ezra Zephyr, he will be sent to the next round. The mysterious voice resounded in the forest. Of a sudden, light engulfed Ezra. Fenrir stopped the refining process and went back inside the body of his host. Ezra pondered if his arm can be reattached by the owner of this mysterious voice. In the meantime, he tried to call back Mad God Bear and Razor Pearl Eagle, and to his wonderment, both came back. He turned to look at the place where space descent was used and saw that the entire land was okay. What is this? How did Caver get back in my pentagon when he failed before? But before he could think more, the light blinded him. SHOOSSSHSH. The red werewolf appeared in an unseen area of the tower. It was a strange place. All around it was a huge captivating lake backed by a large rampart of a mountain range. In the very middle of the lake was a piece of land, as big as the forest he was in before. The prince saw that all his wounds were healed and his hunch was on the point, even his sliced arm and slashed eye became normal. With a jolly face, he looked here and there only to find another familiar individual. That's right, it was no one but Jon Stark. He defeated Fairy Hololeth and arrived at the last round. His eyes widened and a series of terrors appeared on his eyes when he saw a red werewolf. He quickly understood who he was. You defeated Carlo? Asked the fair sort of humanity. Ezra Zephyr nodded. This is the final round, you can surrender whenever you want. The winner shall be the sole inheritor of my Spirity Bailiwick, you may start now. The winner decided after the surrender or death of other. The mysterious voice reverberated again. My Spirity Bailiwick. So this voice belonged to the very master who created this mystical place. Cold sweat ran down Jon's face. Ezra looked at Jon Stark with a murderous gaze, and the latter understood. I surrender. It was a quick surrender, and as quick as the surrender, the mysterious voice resounded once again. Therefore, the winner of the Spirity Bailiwick is Ezra Zephyr. However, the red werewolf didn't celebrate and absorbed the martial spirit of Raja Indarapatra. As soon as Fenrir refined it, Ezra howled like a wild wolf. AWWWO. Deafening thundering sounds came out of his body, and black bolts as thick as a tree trunk flickered everywhere. Jon Stark was shocked and quickly dashed away. He made a 300 meters gap between them but could still feel the immeasurable amount of power from these strange blackish bolts. The chaos force of Ezra was evolving. After all, it was a 10th grade martial spirit. The Prince of Bloodfang was in a desperate situation, he felt as if his skin would tear away. He quickly used the dragon pelt and solidify his skin. Ezra yelled at the sky as a huge blast occurred. Boom! 8 orbs started to rotate behind his back and his body was soaked in sweat and blood. You stupid wolf pant, I was about to pant die. Ezra said to his martial spirit. Fenrir laughed. Haha, it was a fun show. Zip it, you wanna be god. Why did the devouring hurt so much this time? Ezra retorted and asked. Because I didn't digest it to level up my grade. I am already at the peak of 8th grade and more than that could make me a 9th grade martial spirit and that would attract the unnecessary attention of the upper realm. Yeah, like an 8th grade is a common thing here. He retorted once again. I used the remaining power to modify and evolve the chaos force. Answered Fenrir. What? Ezra was surprised, he quickly checked and his eyes widened. The black bolts became a lot thicker and had small scarlet lines in them. The power of his spiritual energy reached an unheard level in this lowly realm. He smiled in his werewolf form, sharp fangs were revealed, he closed his eyes and started another absorption. The refinement of Carlo's soul began, and spiritual energy thundered out of his body in the form of reddish-black lightning. And soon, the process ended. He could feel the bursting power inside his body. He reached the beginning point of peak first level of the core formation stage. A bit more and he will break through to the second level of the core formation stage. From far, Jon Stark trembled at the strange sight, a strange fear engulfed his mind as if his heart was in the palm of a grim reaper. The Prince of Bloodfang Kingdom looked at him, without any unnecessary movements he transformed back to his human form, the black imprints turned back into a black coat and the silver coating became wolf shoulder plates. Hello friend, thanks for letting me win, said Ezra as he waved his hand at Jon Stark with a wicked grin on his face. Jon Stark gulped, but he was not a coward, the battle was ended as well and he stepped forward. He was addled and daunted, yet he gathered the guts to come in front. You are defying the logic, your existence is a slap to every genius of this continent, said fair sort of humanity as he clenched his fist. The prince laughed, haha, I'll take it as a compliment. By the way, I have a matter to discuss with you. Jon squinted his eyebrows unintentionally. I am here, what's the matter? Ezra smiled and said something. Jon's eyes widened, he was shaken as he asked. But why? Ezra shook his head and tried to divert the question. Will you do it or not? I have a valuable reward for you as well, one that will evolve you by leaps and bounds. But, only if you say yes. Ezra winked. Fair sort of humanity was in a state of daze. He was not a greedy one, but still, he asked. You are insane. What is the reward? Ezra smirked and his bracelet shone. A scroll came out. Ezra handed that scroll to him and said, Here, confirm it. The moment John read that, his body started to shiver and so was his sword. The white broadsword trembled in excitement. It caught Ezra's attention. This weapon? He pondered. Yes, boy, it's a legendary weapon. Fenrir confirmed. It was Ezra's time to surprise. What? How did he lay his hands on a legendary tear sword? He asked. How in both realms would I know that? Dumb prince of kobolds. The wolf mocked. Ezra sked. I just won a death battle, my mind is in fatigue. It always is, not a news to me. Fenrir retorted it was his payback time for earlier humiliations. Suddenly, the mysterious voice resounded. Rewards will be distributed shortly. Everyone, wait patiently. As it ended, a light covered Ezra and WHOSSSSHHH. He was teleported to somewhere else, leaving John Stark on the island. The Prince of Bloodfang Kingdom reached a rooftop-like place. It was so high in the sky that he could easily see everything. The entire Spirity Bailiwick was as big as the reach of his eye, with beautiful meadows and rivers, tall mountain ranges, and whatnot. It was a very beautiful and pleasant land, no need to say the big amount of spiritual energy here. The prince walked on the jade-like floor of the rooftop. Mysterious yet powerful mist was passing him through him. He was inspecting the scenery as a whole when he heard the mysterious voice. Come here. Ezra flinched, the voice carried phenomenal power. He turned and saw a throne-like seat at the very center of the rooftop. When did it appear here? He asked himself. Here. John Stark's eyebrows twitched as he unleashed his spiritual energy. WHOOSSSSHHH. Sharp and suffocating sword chi pushed the Bloodfang's martial masters. But not all of them. Zulfi Dimitri and Shafa Pista were unflinching, and their gale arms also controlled to halt himself with greater efforts. John understood and cancelled his chi as he said. In the previous round, Ezra and Carlo went to the same ring and I went with Princess of Elfpatria. I came out victorious with lesser wounds. However, Ezra's entire body was devastated, but he won against Carlo Aur. Everyone was baffled. The ones who were more surprised were Acker Boldheart and the next Gen XYR, because they felt the power of that man and engaged with him. They knew how terrifying of a martial master he was. Yet, he was killed by Ezra Zephyr, who they considered a cripple. If that is the case, then what kind of monster is Ezra Zephyr? What, even Carlo is dead? A panicked voice came out of a certain area, attracting the attention of all. As soon as they saw that figure, hatred emerged in their hearts. Especially the martial masters of Bloodfang Kingdom. She was none other than Emily Jomez. She survived their gale arms and reached here. The rest of her entire group perished. Salam Ukwali, Victor Brownmane, Ixtal Malark and all other upper realm invaders. All died, leaving her in the den of monsters. Ignore her for now, we will deal with her later. Ordered Zulfi Dimitri, and everyone turned their hateful gazes away, giving her the room to breathe. John Stark was asked to continue, and he spoke again. He could have won easily, but he was terribly injured and the last round didn't heal. I told him to surrender, but he fought, and even in that state, he drove me into the corner many times. He stuttered many times. Others thought that he is in shock, but in truth, he stuttered because he was lying. The Prince of Werewolves was befuddled, his brain became numb. Such a powerful entity who ruled and controlled the entire Spirity Bailiwick that even made other continents go nuts in greed called him his king and knelt. Fenrir, what is happening? He asked. But no reply came from the other side. Senior, please stand. He came and raised the man and asked. Who are you? The man smiled and said. I am first disciple of your ancestor, Bjorn Zephyr. Hearing such words, Ezra Zephyr could not help but go nuts. He lost words to speak. It took him quite a time to adjust his mind to an incoming tempest of abnormal information. It is an honor to meet you, disciple of Ancestor. That makes you my great-great-great-granduncle, or maybe a few more greats in between, isn't it? Ezra said with a smile. His evil and cunning self was not here at all. The handsome man smiled and shook his head. No, your majesty. I am not but a mere subject of yours, you are the heir of Master Bjorn's legacy, said the handsome man. You are mistaken, senior. The current king is my father, King Mirza Zephyr. Ezra corrected. The man gently shook his head again. I am not talking about the little kingdom that resides at the end of the continent called Bloodfang, I am talking about the legacy of Master Bjorn. Answer the handsome man. Ezra asked in a perturbed way. Is it related to my martial spirit? Yes, the one who will possess the monstrous wolf of Norse as his spirit, and the bloodline of the royal werewolf family will become the heir of Master Bjorn's legacy. The handsome man explained. Fenrir, did you know about it? The prince questioned. I had a hunch, but when we came here, I was assured. The wolf replied. Then why didn't you inform me? Ezra was slightly disappointed. Fenrir looked at him and replied. Because this is not something I should interfere in, this legacy is from Bjorn Zephyr as a king, not Bjorn Zephyr as my host. Ezra Zephyr was dumbfounded. He stared at the handsome man who was cheerfully smiling and asked. Senior, what is your name? My name is Ayrton Magnus, I am a dragonkin, said the handsome man. Ezra Zephyr's eyes widened as he heard that. A dragonkin. A beastman tribe that only exists in archaic records. He said to himself. Never ever have I thought that dragonkins also live here. Ezra said. Ayrton smiled. We exist, my liege. Our race is very powerful, only we and few others had the power to rival werewolves. He said. This was another wave of shock for Ezra. The mighty dragonkin are saying they could rival werewolves. Since when werewolves became that much power, the current image of werewolves hardly allow them to sit in the list of top 5 tribes in the beastmen race. What are you saying, senior? It is N-. My liege, call me Ayrton, it is my humble request. He beseeched. Ezra nodded his head and continued. Ayrton, please stand up. I don't know why did you compare werewolves with dragonkins, but we are far below the mythical tribes. Only my red wolf family is strong, but not to the level of dragonkins. The handsome man Ayrton stood and leaned as he extended his hand towards the strange throne and said. I will explain everything, please sit on the throne, my liege. Ezra scratched his head and took steps towards the strange throne on which Ayrton was sitting a few minutes ago. Ezra sat on the throne, which was made of strange jade-like stones. The moment he sat, a strange sense of familiarity arose inside his chest as if the throne was itching for Ezra Zephyr. He felt like he could see the entirety of Spirity Bailiwick while sitting on that throne. My liege, may I explain from the very beginning? Asked the dragonkin. The prince of werewolves nodded his head and said. Yes, please. Hearing that the handsome dragonkin stood respectfully, his long jet hair fluttered from the air as he opened his mouth. My liege, your ancestor, Master Bjorn was born in the upper realm, but his fate was sealed when numerous factions united to eliminate him just because of the sole reason that he possesses the martial spirit of Fenrir. He destroyed his martial prowess and came to the lower realm to hide. However, for a genius like him, it was not a big deal to reconstitute the martial prowess, and he did so. During that time, I met him. He saw potential in me and trained me to an extent that no one on this continent could rival me except him. I even fought toe-to-toe with the heavenly demon of a sect called Spirit Devouring Mountain. Spirit Devouring Mountain was the only sect that had absolute authority, but I destroyed it, with my master being the judge. Many things happened, but they are irrelevant to mention. After defeating the Spirit Devouring Mountain, no one dared to even stare at us. After that, Master Bjorn made the Bloodfang Empire to hide Fenrir and preserve his bloodline. He was in a rush, maybe he couldn't heal the wounds he received. To cut the long story short, Master Bjorn ordered me to wait here until someone from his bloodline who possessed Fenrir as well appear. His words were, Zephyr with Black Wolf will be my sole successor. I did what I was told without any question, and after waiting for thousands of years, the one who I waited for came. He ended as he looked at Ezra. Ezra Zephyr looked at him with widened eyes. He lowered his head and pondered for a moment, then asked, Ayrton, what is the legacy of Ancestor Bjorn? The Dominion, my liege. The Dominion? You mean the same Dominion as that of Los Filipinos and Greeks? Ezra became agitated. Indeed, my liege. This entire Spirity Bailiwick was the dominion of Master Bjorn in the upper realm. Ezra's mind was in dilemma. The place that everyone desired to possess was actually waiting for him to come and claim. The Prince of Werewolves was in deep heat. Ayrton spoke again. However, my liege, you cannot use the powers of Dominion until you gather all the pieces of tokens. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There must be some sort of test or anything, right? Asked Ezra. Haha, my liege is a smart man, you are correct. I knew you were the foretold successor of Master Bjorn, and I could have saved all the trouble you faced, which includes the deathly battles. But I was forbidden to do any such thing. It was my test, and you had to reach first place to pass it. I was also aware of when those Filipino invaders came, but I let them roam. I watched your every move, and how you got your hands on the dragon pelt. I knew you can handle them, because from now on there will be many monstrous enemies. The equilibrium is broken and many factions are sending their people in the lower realm to invade. Ezra nodded his head. He looked calm, but inside his head a storm was erupting. At that time something mystic happened. The body of Ayrton Magnus vibrated. Ayrton, what is happening to you? Ezra inquired in worry. Nothing, my liege. My work has ended here. Now I have to ascend and set the stage for your arrival. He said as he took out a necklace. It has a wolf's head in it, surrounded by 5 empty sword scabbards. Ayrton waved his hand and a small sword came and went inside one of the empty scabbards. My liege, the remaining 4 swords are kept by the other 4 disciples of Master Bjorn. All of them are in this continent. You have to find them and pass their tests. Once all swords will fill the scabbards. This dominion, which is bigger than this continent, will be yours. And one more thing, my liege. Red Wolf family is not the royal family of Bloodfang, but it is the royal family of all werewolves in the upper realm, including many major beastman tribes. With these words, the dragonkin vanished into thin air. My liege, your loyal subject will wait for you in the upper realm. The voice of Ayrton Magnus resounded in the sky. Ezra looked at the sky and murmured. Fenrir, we need to talk. What is it, boy? The monstrous wolf of Norse asked. What is a dominion? You will know when the time will come. Who are the other 4 disciples of Ancestor Bjorn? You will eventually meet them. Is the equilibrium of both realms broken as Ayrton mentioned? Yes. Is our Red Wolf family the strongest family in the werewolf tribe? Yes. Ezra sighed after a quick series of questions and answers. We only have slightly better speed and power, can't believe we are best even in the upper realm. It's because your family hasn't lifted the restrictions, said Fenrir. Ezra flinched. What restrictions? The original name of your family by which the upper realm recognize it is Drakel Wolf family, but Bjorn put restrictions on his bloodline and changed it to Red Wolf family. Ezra was flummoxed by what he heard. Drakel Wolf family, he slowly repeated the words he heard from Fenrir. Your bloodline wields a terrifying power. Bjorn put 5 restrictions on his bloodline that only his true successor can unleash, said Fenrir. True successor, you mean me? Asked the prince. Yes, Fenrir nodded positively. How can I lift those restrictions? Prince of Bloodfang Kingdom asked. The monstrous wolf of Norse shook his head. I know, but I can't tell you. Why? Don't tell me it's something like the legacy of Bjorn or any other bullshit. The behavior of Ezra became irate. You will know as you gather all the remaining 4 swords. The procedure will be shown to you when you'll get enough power to defend yourself from danger. The sole reason behind Bjorn's harsh decision was to hide his bloodline. His family was already considered a fishbone in the throat just because of their godly bodies. When Bjorn made me his martial spirit, he was already 36 years old. But being in the upper realm, the news spread like wildfire. With the help of mythic dominions, the rivals of the Drackle wolf family eliminated the entire race. In order to let you all live peacefully, he put 5 restrictions, 1 on each sword. And I will not ruin his plans. Find the remaining 4 swords, and when all 4 disciples deem you worthy, only then you can lift the restrictions by pouring your blood on the swords. Fenrir finished. Ezra squinted his eyebrows. Oh, so I only need to drop my blood on the necklace? Yes, wait. No. Ezra grinned in evil. Are you sure, you are a powerful mythical martial spirit? Fenrir growled. It was a slip of tongue. It looked like it was a slip of tongue, however, Fenrir was not a being who could do such mistakes. He intentionally told him by acting as if it was a slip of tongue. Ezra laughed. He took out Efsa and gently tapped the tip of his finger on his short sword's tip. A blood drop popped up as he pulled up his strange wolf-faced necklace and dropped the blood droplet on it. Nothing happened, said Ezra. Fenrir didn't show any expression as he said. That's unexpected. Ezra sighed and leaned on the throne when suddenly a strange heat erupted his body. What is this? He felt a burning sensation. I can feel an appalling amount of strength in my body. Soon the strange burning sensation ended. Ezra was in a sweat. He looked at his body. His height increased from 6 feet 2 inches to 6 feet 4 inches, and so did his body frame. It was not much visible, but his overall body frame grew. This strength, I can sense that my physical power has evolved to a new height. I am shivering at the mere thought of how powerful I will be after lifting the remaining 4 restrictions. A man in a royal dress was in sweat. The patches of salty liquid invaded his dress as he panted. Beside him was a crown embedded with beautiful carvings and pearls. The crown was on the floor. He stood up and checked his body. What just happened? This man was none other than Ezra Zephyr. He was working in his office and was about to start his daily training when he felt a strange heat in his body. His height also grew from 6 feet 2 inches to 6 feet 5 inches feet. At that point, another figure appeared from the door, a giant 7 feet 0 inches feet man. Mirza's eyes widened when he saw him. Dad? Yes, it's me. Unlike his son who was panting, the canine fists was in sweats but didn't pant, or he was trying his best not to. What happened to us? Feroza asked his son. I don't know, replied Mirza. Both became silent for a while before Feroza spoke again. Son, have you read the ancestral memoirs? Yes, I have. Why, Dad? Feroza looked at the towering height that he just achieved and extra muscles which looked as if they were pumped with air. See your chest, said Feroza. Mirza did as said, and he saw a strange wolf symbol on his body with 1 sword in a scabbard above it. It was emitting a radiant red light. This light, perhaps, someone has lifted the restrictions, said Feroza in a low voice. Without any delay, the former king of Bloodfang followed the current king. Soon, they arrived at a library. It only had a few shelves, but all were keenly placed and cleaned. Only those who cannot read and write could enter this room for the only purpose of cleaning. Mirza moved his finger around the scrolls until his finger stopped on a certain scroll on which the word first was written, indicating the first emperor of Bloodfang Empire. Unlike now, the earlier Bloodfang was a huge empire, not a small kingdom. Mirza opened the scroll and started reading. Feroza stood behind him and listened, as he was not a man fond of reading. Mirza stopped at a point, his voice pitched up as he read. All 5 restrictions shall be removed once my successor dips the swords in his Zephyr blood. Radiant wolf will shine on the chest with 5 swords and scabbards. Successor? First emperor and our forefather, Bjorn Zephyr's successor. Aren't you the current king of Bloodfang Kingdom and I, the previous one? Who else could be the successor? Asked Feroza. No, Dad, forefather was a very wise man, none in the history of us Zephyrs could be compared to him. His finger moved from line to line as he read, and once again, he stopped and pitched up his voice as he read. Removal of restrictions shall put an end to Red Wolf family. Feroza's heart skipped a beat, his pulse increased as he got anticipated. What does that mean, son? Will a catastrophe befell upon us because our restrictions are lifted? Mirza didn't reply and kept reading. Son? He asked again. Mirza finally snapped. Dad, shut up. I can't concentrate, I am as frustrated as you, or maybe more. Stay quiet and let me find out. Forefather Bjorn's records are like pieces of puzzles. If he writes a question in first paragraph, then the answer will be in 67th. Even I who have completely memorized the memoirs of late ancestors couldn't comprehend the depth of Forefather Bjorn's records, including the memoir of that ancestor. Huh. Who was the other one except Forefather Bjorn Zephyr? Asked Feroza. He was a man who never cared about anything, including his own kingdom. Just like that, he didn't care about Mirza's irritation and asked what he wanted to know. Mirza sighed. He knew nothing will come if he argue with his father to stay silent. Third Emperor, Xerxes Zephyr. He was the most mysterious and ambitious emperor in Bloodfang's history. But one day, he went somewhere and never came back. He told his father and started to read again. The reading went on until he stopped. My successor shall end the fake name and revive the archaic name of my bloodline, the Dracul-Wolf family. Only removal of restrictions can undo Dracul-Wolf family. Feroza didn't understand the words, but the current king fully grasped the hidden meaning as he widened his eyes in shock. His face was dipped in sweat, especially his forehead. He kept reading and reading until he reached the final paragraph. It was there that Bjorn Zephyr wrote. Zephyr with Black Wolf will be my sole successor. That was it. The moment they read those words, only one name came to their mind. Ezra. Both men murmured at the same time. There are only 3 members of the Red Wolf family alive, only 3 with the surname of Zephyr in the entire continent. He has become the successor of our forefather, as expected of my grandson, ha ha ha. Feroza laughed in happiness. However, the father of Ezra Zephyr, the wiser man between the 2 people present, was in deep heat. He didn't know whether to be happy or sad that his precious son became the successor of Bjorn Zephyr. Now knowing all the things and witnessing the restriction lifted, he could piece up all the information of other ancestors who warned and guided the successor. The troubles and terrors of successor's arrival, enemies of the upper realm and other continents shall invade. The successor must be killed to calm the calamity prophesied. These were the words recorded in the memoir of Third Emperor Xerxes Zephyr, the eldest grandson of Bjorn Zephyr. Mirza clenched his fist and solidified his guts as he said to his father. Dad, be ready, there will be unending wars from this point on. We have to protect Ezra, no matter what. There was a fire ignited in his eyes. The mountain-like old man laughed. Haha, I am always ready. Mirza gritted his teeth as he stared at a scroll in the shelf. It had Third written on it. I won't allow anyone to harm my son, even if his existence brings calamities. If such calamities befell upon us, I will burn them myself. The Prince of Bloodfang Kingdom was astounded to witness something. After pouring a droplet of blood, he unlocked the first restriction, and along with it another thing happened as well. Ezra was recognized as the successor of Bjorn Zephyr by the first sword in the scabbard. He could now feel the extent and immensity of Spirity Bailiwick. But apart from that, he couldn't do anything. Unlike the cave of Fenrir, the Spirity Bailiwick couldn't be taken along in a bracelet. He was still in a ponder when he was suddenly struck by blinding lights. He knew what was happening. It was teleportation. Whoosh. The werewolf prince was teleported, and when his eyes were adjusted after a sudden flash, he saw himself on the island, surrounded by numerous people. Ezra looked at them and recognized all of them. Were martial masters of Bloodfang Kingdom. They knelt before their king and gave a respectful salute. Their faces were glowing in admiration at the fact that their prince could defeat someone who came from the upper realm. The upper realm is a place that every man wishes to see, because the lower realm has some unexplained restrictions. One will automatically be ascended the moment their power reach at the peak of the spiritual transformation stage. Some use ancient methods to hide the power, just like the dragonkin Ayrton Magnus did for centuries until he did his job and ascended. In the very same manner, lower realm dwellers fear the upper realm. Because one thing was certainly undeniable, that only monsters of outlandish martial prowess live there. However, the prince of theirs killed one of such monsters. A monster who even made super geniuses like John Stark and Fairy Hololeth stench and sweat. Ezra looked at John Stark and winked. The latter felt a chill running down his spine. "Hee, you look tensed," asked the enchantress of Elfpatria. John Stark shook his head and sighed. "I don't know if he is a blessing or curse for the lower realm," he asked. "Blessing for Bloodfang and curse for the rest of the continent," replied another individual. He was Leomord Tigerian. John and Fairy gave him a positive glance. The fair sword spoke. "I can foretell that his every move and every word coming out of his mouth is a piece of the stage that he is setting for the grand festival in future." The group of the trio was a bit away from the rest. Acker Boldheart mingled with them as if he was a werewolf himself. What surprised the rest was XYR. The shy guy was actually a good talker, and for some unknown reasons, ever since he heard that Ezra Zephyr defeated Carlo Aur, he has been very friendly towards Bloodfangs. The only figure who had none to talk with was Emily Jomez. While everyone was in the middle of chatter and all, the mysterious voice came again. "This is the end of Spirity Bailiwick. Have your rewards and grow." Ezra was curious. He saw Ayrton ascending, and if he really ascended, then whose voice was this? "Relax, boy. It's a recorded voice," said Fenrir. Soon, arrows made of pure lightning descended. Everyone flinched at first, but they soon knew what these arrows were carrying. They hit the fists of all participants. Out of 87 participants of Bloodfang Kingdom who got their name on Spirity Tablet, only 68 were alive. The rest perished in the flames of battle. More than half were killed by Rollo Aur's abyssal slash. These 68 were only able to clear first round, so they got a single pill as a reward. But that pill was not an ordinary one. It was a 6th tier pill, Essence Melioration Pill. A pill which has an 80% success ratio in cleaning the entirety of impurities and expanding vitality. After them come Leomord Tigerian and Emily Jomez, the only two people who survived after losing second round. They received an Essence Melioration Pill and a special tier weapon. After them was the turn of Zulfi, Shifa, Acker, and Thur. They all received the Essence Melioration Pill and a special tier weapon and a Gamma Layer skill. Now Fairy Hololeth, who was able to compete in the top 4, received the same rewards with an addition of 7th tier energy-inducing pill. An amazing pill that can raise 1 level in cultivation immediately. The eyes turned towards the remaining duo, Ezra and John. The prince sighed. "Another 7th tier pill." After him, John continued. "Likewise, but I also got a martial arts manual." "What is a martial art manual?" "I don't know, do you?" "No, let's ask His Majesty later." "Good idea." That was a lie. The real winner was Ezra Zephyr. His eyes widened in surprise to find that the price of first ranker was this. "The familiar pill, Bjorn had them here too?" said Fenrir to himself. "Cubic spirit pill, one that contains a grade 6 martial spirit." He was shocked, beyond his wits. That was it, with everyone receiving their rewards. Soon, the tower started to shake and everyone was teleported. When they reappear, 7 figures floated in midair. They looked at John Stark with a friendly and welcoming smile, but when their eyes landed on Ezra Zephyr, their faces were twisted in horror and disgust, especially the face of Levos, envoy of the Holy Law Sect. He was vengeful. Ezra caught these changes and turned his gaze to the man who shared the tea with him. The well-dressed man who was the envoy of Duo Mountain Peak. But that man lowered his head, and Ezra's pulse increased. "Something's fishy," he pondered. "Indeed, boy. Be prepared for all possible things," warned Fenrir. The fissure was forced to open again and the path to the outside world appeared, one after another. hundreds of people jumped out. They landed on the other side of the land like locusts falling on a field. They walked, and people cried and praised them as they went through them in pride. Return to the hall that brought you, Sect selection list will be told tomorrow. Levos's sound resounded, his gaze was still stuck on Ezra Zephyr, he grunted and vanished. Everyone went to the hall they were teleported in. In the same manner, Ezra and his people moved with Ukulele Hall as their aim. When they saw the Ukulele city in sight, Ezra's eyes twitched. He saw a familiar face, the beautiful face of Bipasha Ukulele. "Long time no see," said Ezra with a wide smirk on his face. Bipasha, who was sure that she will remain calm, blushed at the sight of Ezra. She remembered the price he told her in exchange for a special tier weapon. He became taller, Bipasha thought. She controlled her paced pulse and moved towards Ezra. Her red rose-like lips educed the sexual urge of youth males. However, their fear of Ezra was a lot more than the hormonal urge. "What was your rank?" she asked, her tone arrogant as if she didn't expect anything from them. "I am second ranked." These 4 came in the top 8 and 68 had their names of Spirity Bailiwick, replied Ezra. Bipasha's face was not changed at all, she hummed and retorted. "I am not in the mood to joke, tell me." "I told the truth, you can go and ask the envoys of 7 sections." Hearing that, Bipasha's eyes widened, she couldn't believe it, no matter what. Ezra Zephyr came close. "I have work for you." "Who do you think? The price is a special tier armor," said Ezra before she could finish. Bipasha passed at that moment, her beautiful face looked at Ezra in awe. "What is it?" she asked. Ezra said something, his eyebrows furrowed before she calmed herself and replied. "Yes, I can do that." To be real, this price is huge for such a small task. Ezra laughed. "Haha, my life is on the stack, I feel negative vibes from the 7 sections." "Alright, consider it done. Now let's move, you have to rest, for tomorrow is a big day," said Bipasha as she turned to walk away. Her buttocks and juicy curves could be grasped by her tightly worn clothes. "I'll wait for you tonight." Ezra's voice resounded in Bipasha's head. He used telepathy. She stopped for a minute and kept moving without looking back at all. Ezra saw her leaving back and said, "She is old and experienced, why she is acting like a virgin? Maybe you have caught her heart for real, that's another possibility, boy." Ezra laughed and moved on and soon arrived at the point where they had set their camp before. The Prince of Werewolves was resting in his tent, his scarlet eyes checked the roof of the tent, showing that he was getting bored. At that time, he felt a presence. With a swift and quick jerk, he stood with both of his weapons in his hands. "Prince Ezra Zephyr of Bloodfang Kingdom, please forgive my concealed approach. I am nothing but a servant of Miss Bipasha." Ezra's eyes lit up. "Oh, Bipasha. Keep talking. She has called you," said the shadow-like man. Ezra nodded and said, "I understand, stay outside and give me a minute." The unknown figure nodded and vanished. Ezra refreshed himself and poured a perfume which he took out from the cave and moved. It was said that on the night when all the martial masters returned from Spirity Bailiwick, a strange romantic fragrance was scattered in the city, and every house that had a man and woman leaked the sound of moans the entire night. Ezra arrived at the site of the city, a small house was built there and Ezra was gestured to go inside. Despite his appearance, he was fully prepared for any outcome. He saw a slightly open door, and the prince went and opened the door. He saw a square-wide bed with Bipasha laid on it. She had nothing on her except net lingerie, her revealing body forced Ezra's little commander to yell, "Attention!" The room had a libido booster red light, and Bipasha was prepared and hot. With the seducing perfume on Ezra, her mind became numb as she moaned slowly. She couldn't look at Ezra's face, the werewolf slowly moved towards her to look at the female who made his strong will quiver. Ezra gently touched her cheek and bent down to kiss it. Muahh. A passionate and wet kiss on her cheek, her body of her trembled as she gradually turned her head to look at Ezra. Both saw each other so closely for the first time, both eyes got closed as their lips merged. Lower lip, upper lip, tongue, and sometimes both lips at the same. Despite being a noob, Ezra showed the art of lip lock to an astonishing level. While they were drowning in the kiss, Ezra's hand made a move and slid towards the chunky breast of Bipasha. His big hands couldn't detain the hooters as he gently squeezed them. The seasoned female didn't wait and grabbed the cobra of the werewolf. Ezra threw away his clothes and bracelet and gobbled at her bosomy rounded big mushy boobs. Soon, his dome head touched the valley of Bipasha. The river flowed out of the valley as the dome head made its move. Ah, she moaned as she felt something invading her fanny. Ha, it's big, ah, she moaned. Ezra was the same, it was the first time he was lost in the maze of pleasure. The entire room that was brimming in red light was filled with the air of lust. Bipasha's long nails tore the back of Ezra. Ggggrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr coming out, but he controlled it as he kissed Bapasha equally. She kicked Ezra and changed the position. She was now in charge. She sit on his Mr. Bean and shoved it inside out. Her melons bounced in front of Ezra Zephyr, disturbing the equilibrium of his sheer control. He raised his hands to squeeze them. He could see and feel his fingers digging into her soft melons. She bent down and slammed her boobs on Ezra's face. The werewolf was not an ordinary one, and with the opportunity in front, he bit her nipple. Ah, rascal. He held her waist and lifted her a little. He put pressure on his feet while sleeping, and THAP, 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 THAP. A series of bangs resounded as Ezra clapped Bapasha's cheeks. This went on for an entire night. A night when the Ukulele city was reverberating with cries and moans. The day broke out and the sunlight kissed the grounds. At that time, Ezra Zephyr was already in his tent. Numerous hickeys decorated his neck and chest as he was smiling in satisfaction. "Your Majesty, it's time," said the Argyle Arms. Ezra came out as he stretched and yawned. "Your Majesty, were you perhaps unable to sleep last night?" he asked. "Yeah," replied Ezra with a wicked smile as he continued. "I was attacked by a powerful beaut. I had to fight her all night." "Huh. Your Majesty, are you all right?" Thor was alarmed as he turned to call the rest. "Hey, calm down. I was joking," said Ezra with a waving hand. "Oh, haha. I apologize," he uttered. He looked at his prince and saw the red marks on his neck. "Miss Bapasha was sure powerful, haha." Ezra stared at him. "What did you say?" Nothing, my lord. I just said Miss Bapasha is waiting outside. It's the time of selection," he replied as he tried to veil his grin. "Let's go," ordered the Prince of Bloodfang Kingdom. They both arrived where the rest of the people were. A number of 385 martial masters from the Bloodfang Kingdom joined the Spirity Bailiwick. 381 5th grade spirit holders, 3 6th grade, and last was Ezra Zephyr himself. Out of these, 73 lost their lives in Spirity Bailiwick, including the 18 who died in Spirity Tower. Ezra and Bapasha met again. Their eyes met, but none avoided the contact as both gave a romantic smile. Even the dumbest of Bloodfang could feel something suspicious, with the exception of the likes of Thur, who understood and grasped the event that happened last night. They didn't say anything and started moving towards the designated location, a vast ground. There was nothing special about it except that the sky above was filled with thousands of people shading the sunlight like locusts. They all were envoys of their respective sects. Bloodfang Kingdom's flag fluttered as a bulky martial master was holding it. The flag caught the attention of everyone. Ezra became the hero of those geniuses. He managed to kill the invader who uninvitedly visited Spirity Bailiwick and caused numerous deaths. The masses looked at them with awe eyes. After the many geniuses left the Spirity Bailiwick and rested, their energy came back and muffled voices of whispers were getting louder. Cough. A soft cough suddenly rang out across the area, somehow covering every other noise, and the entire place fell silent. Every genius watched as 7 spiritual energy clouds drifted over from far away. 7 figures were seated on each cloud, powerful spiritual energy pressure rippling from their bodies. They were the 7 envoys. Upon their arrival, the crowd of geniuses grew nervous. They knew that the end of the Spirity Bailiwick was the start of the selection by the envoys of sections. Those that they found worthy would be allowed to enter the sects to train. These 7 were the strongest first-degree sects in Narran continent. For every genius present, it was akin to a carp leaping through the dragon's gate. 7 clouds of spiritual energy hovered in the air. 7 figures were seated on each one, powerful and vigorous Genesis chi spreading from their bodies that intimidated and awed everyone in the area. In the face of these 7 nascent soul experts, the numerous geniuses were all extremely respectful, not daring to show the slightest hint of arrogance as they patiently waited. Because they knew that these 7 practically had complete control over the futures of every genius here. The first-degree sects, also known as 7 sacred sects, are the face of might. As long as one could enter and train inside, one's future would be incomparable to staying behind in a continent like theirs. After all, the best resources and experts of Narran continent were gathered in these 7 sects. Hence, many people felt that even entering these 7 sects as an ordinary disciple would be better than being a genius in the Narran continent. Ezra Zephyr's gaze also looked towards the 7 envoys. He had already gained information about the 7 sacred sects in the Spirity Bailiwick and now knew that the tea-loving well-dressed man was an envoy of the Dua Mountain Peak. As for the fair, clean-shaven levos that looked like a dishonorable middle-aged man, he was the envoy of the Holy Law Sect. The other 5 sects were the Dragon Bone Pavilion, Sword Mastery Abode, Continental Magic Academy, Myriad Miracle Tower, and the Veiled Virgin Valley. These 5 great sects were also very famous in Narran continent and were said to be behemoth-like existences. On one of the clouds, the Holy Law Sect's envoy, Levos, swept his cold gaze across the crowd. His gaze was akin to the edge of a blade, no one daring to meet it. Although you are the geniuses of the Narran continent, it will not be so easy to enter our 7 sacred sections. You should know that there are millions of continents in the lower realm, and the Narran continent really doesn't stick out amongst them. The other continents also have all kinds of geniuses of uncountable numbers. Envoys from the 7 sacred sects have also been sent to these places to select disciples. Therefore, do not feel so pleased with yourselves just because you performed somewhat decently in the Spirity Bailiwick. If put amongst the entire younger generation of lower realm, none of you are anything special. Levos' indifferent voice was akin to a basin of cold water, giving a cold awakening to numerous geniuses that had originally been under the impression that they had performed pretty well in the Spirity Bailiwick. Ezra Zephyr also frowned slightly. He could feel that Levos' frosty gaze seemed to pause on him when he spoke as if these words were directed at the former. However, Ezra's expression did not change, neither showing joy nor anger. Zulfi mumbled in a low voice, "How loathsome." "Hee, envoy Levos need not be so stern. I feel that there are some pretty good seedlings among these little ones. If we provide guidance and training for them, they may even become pillars that support our continent in the future." While the numerous geniuses in the area were completely silent, a laugh suddenly rang out. If one turned to look, one would discover that the one who had spoken was the currently smiling envoy of a sect which was placed in the spot below the 7 sects. It was an envoy of a second-degree sect. The second powerhouses of the continent, next to first-degree sects. Alright, let's not waste any more time. Begin the selection process. The one who spoke this time was a man with numerous sword wounds on his body. His face was cold and stern, the spiritual energy around him extremely sharp, while 2 swords lay across his waist. He was the envoy of the Sword Mastery Abode. Those who managed to reach the Spirity Tower may take a step forward. A woman's kind and gentle voice sounded. She wore palace robes on which an exquisite pattern of 100 flowers could be seen, but her face hidden with a veil. She was clearly the envoy from the Veiled Virgin Valley. At the sound of her voice, a few dozen figures walked out from the crowd of geniuses. They were the group who had managed to reach the Spirity Tower. Geniuses like John Stark, Fairy Hololeth, Acker Boldheart, Leomord Tigerian, XYR, and Emily Jomez, who was trembling in fear beside them, came out. Along them came out 69 Bloodfang martial masters who reached and survived the first floor and the top 4 Bloodfangs. Thur, Shifa, Zulfi, and Ezra Zephyr. "Which one of you killed that potent pearl named Carlo Aur?" asked Mortar, envoy of Dragonbone Pavilion. Everyone's eyes turned towards Ezra Zephyr as he said in a normal tone. It was him. He raised his finger at John Stark, and everyone was startled. All the members who heard were dumbfounded, even the members of Bloodfang Kingdom. Why did he deny such a great accomplishment and shove it towards John Stark? The fair sword of humanity looked at the envoy and replied. Yes, it was me. Another shock to the nearby geniuses, they heard him saying Ezra killed Carlo. Why would a man righteous as John would lie, or he is speaking the truth? Then why did he lie before? A wave of unanswerable questions assaulted them, but none spoke a word. Emily Jomez, who was trembling, was shocked the most, but she had understood the personality of Ezra to some extent. He is lying, she said to herself, but couldn't tell the envoys, due to sheer fear engraved in her heart. Everyone strangely looked at John Stark, but none complained because he was the one of the 2 of this generation to possess a 7th-grade martial spirit. A rarest genius who can ignite war amongst sects. Very impressive. My sword mastery abode lives for the sword, are you willing to join us? The sword mastery abode's envoy first looked towards John Stark, his voice much gentler, clearly pretty fond of the latter's talent in the sword. John Stark gave a slight nod. I'm willing. His original goal was the sword mastery abode after all. The other geniuses understood upon seeing this. The final few were the envoy's focus, hence why they would even voluntarily ask for these individuals' opinions. Unlike the previous geniuses that had been casually divided amongst the envoys without caring about what they thought. Even so, numerous geniuses were still overflowing with envy. After all, they did not even have the qualifications to be casually divided by the envoys. The gentle-looking man with white hair looked towards Acker Boldheart and said, "The grandmother of yours was also a disciple of our tower, she was once an envoy of the Myriad Miracle Tower. Are you willing to enter our sect, O brave dwarf? With your power and zeal, you can make special tier armaments with our guidance?" Acker respectfully nodded. "I came here to join Myriad Miracle Tower in the first. These 2 little lasses are not bad. Why not both of you join the Veiled Virgin Valley?" The beautiful woman smiled as she looked towards Fairy Hololeth and Emily Jomez. Both exchanged a look with other envoys. After seeing that none of the other envoys was going to say anything, they were about to bow when a voice came. "You can join our Continental Magic Academy as well, the only sect that favors sorcerers," said Dionys. Rubab looked at him hatefully but didn't say anything. The decision was up to these 2. "I want to join Continental Magic Academy," yelled Emily Jomez as if it was her last chance to live. On the other hand, the Enchantress of Elpatria bowed towards Rubab and said, "I'm willing to join Veiled Virgin Valley." The beautiful woman smiled faintly before she cast her gaze towards Ezra Zephyr's side at Shifa Pista and said, "I really like this wild girl too." Orama coughed and said, "Cough, Envoy Rubab, leave one for the rest of us." The other envoys nodded. The main reason why they had allowed the Veiled Virgin Valley Palace to offer the 2 was that the Veiled Virgin Valley only takes females as disciples. After all, the 100-flower fairy palace. Upon seeing the other envoys' objections, the beautiful woman could only regretfully shake her head. The next one was Leomord Tigerian, who entered the Dragonbone Pavilion. At this moment, the Holy Law Sect's envoy, Levos, suddenly looked towards Zulfi Dimitri and said in an indifferent voice, "Zulfi Dimitri, you should enter my Holy Law Sect." The numerous geniuses in the area began to stir, everyone feeling rather discontent. After all, Zulfi was from the Bloodfang Kingdom, and the news already spread that Victor Benedict was selected by Holy Law Sect and was killed by the Prince of the Bloodfang Kingdom. They never expected that Zulfi would still gain the attention of the Holy Law Sect's envoy. However, Levos did not even give them a single glance, merely looking at Zulfi Dimitri. Zulfi didn't even hesitate and ultimately shook his head. I apologize, but I don't want to. I will go wherever my master goes. Holy Law Sect was on the rapid rise in the Naren continent, and entering it to train was definitely an excellent choice, but he rejected it. Levos was fumed, and the remaining 6 were shocked as well. But they were not ordinary people, though. Incidents like this were rare, but similar things occurred on many occasions. Arama breathed out smoke, smiling as he glanced at Zulfi Dimitri, before speaking towards Shifa Pista beside him. Are you willing to enter my duo mountain peak? Shifa Pista nonchalantly shook her head. As such, only she also rejected the offer. At that time, Mortar of Dragon Bone Pavilion looked at the man a little behind this group. He was amongst the thousands of other disciples who couldn't enter the Spirity Tower. You, big guy. Would you like to join Dragon Bone Pavilion? Your body is very suitable to my teachings. Be my disciple. Everyone turned around to look at that man. Even Ezra was curious until his eyes widened and he laughed. It was none other than Argus Waska, a monstrous genius who rivals the likes of Zulfi Dimitri and Shifa Pista. Earlier, Victor Brownmane sneaked attacked him along with his people and injured him. He couldn't have his name on the tablet, so he was left over. He became gloomy over this fact. The other 2 who had 6th grade martial spirits like him were inside the Spirity Tower while he was outside. I am really sorry, Senior, but I cannot join as I will follow my prince. The reply of Argus was direct and clear. Levos turned towards another unparalleled genius and asked. XYR, would you join Holy Law Sect? With that, the entire cult of jinns will bow before you. He was a man with dual spirits, a mighty one who had the capability to defeat Jon Stark. XYR was not a man who would care about anyone. No, I will follow Master Ezra as well. Huh. Eh. Master Ezra. Did he call our prince his master? Is he from Bloodfang as well? Every gaze in the area looked over. Everyone knew that the Prince of Bloodfang Kingdom, Ezra Zephyr, was the most outstanding in this batch's Spirity Bailiwick. Sure enough, Mortar smiled and said, Ezra Zephyr, you are the person that I want my sect to have. But unfortunately, you hold a very strange power. Sucking the life force out of a body to refine as a material is very evil. Ezra's eyes widened when he heard that. He felt killing intent from all the 7 envoys, including the well-dressed man who he offered tea. Even though his face looked sad, but he still was willing to kill Ezra for the sake of the sect. I shall have your head, cried Levos as he launched a giant palm at Ezra. It was fast, way too fast for him to dodge and way too powerful for him to block. He gritted his teeth and in a minuscule amount of time. Boom! A gigantic explosion erupted, and all the sects present were shocked. Hee, just because you are afraid of a young lad, you went on to exterminate. Let me be the seer of your inner thoughts. You all were afraid that if he joined any other sect, then he could emerge on top. That's why, to avoid any trouble, you lots colluded to terminate him, even though you all know that the boy with the sword is not the first ranker. But, you didn't investigate and accepted what he said, because deep inside you all know who the real first ranker was. And the biggest gift for the first ranker is that he could select any sect he wants, from 1st degree to 5th degree. You hypocrite mongrels, you all wear white shiny clean clothes, but you are polluted to the core, he. He was the man who laughed at Levos during his speech, the envoy of a 2nd degree sect. How dare you? Levos was enraged. A mere 2nd degree sect dare to raise voice against the 1st degree sect, said the envoy of Sword Mastery Abode, Blade. Don't waste time and kill him, set an example of hierarchy. The sorcerer of Continental Magic Academy named Dionys said. You, what is the name of your sect? I will exterminate it from the land. Reveal your face, said Mortar in an angry voice. All the other sects were terrified. They were willing to stand beside that man, but they had no power. The top 7 sects are enemies of each other, but when it comes to an outside force, they unite on every platform. The man uncovered his face as he chuckled. I am Xavier. The faces of the 7 envoys changed. They knew who Xavier was. The man continued. Envoy of Spirit Devouring Mountain, he he he. What? The Spirit Devouring Mountain. The savages are back. The former member of 7 sacred sects have come back. At that time Ezra's eyes widened and his heartbeat paced. Spirit Devouring Mountain, the sect whose master fought against Ayrton. They are still active. Zephyr, don't interfere, this youth must be killed, said Levos. I can't let you do that, there is a possibility that he might join our sect, replied Zephyr. Blade scoffed. Humph, who would join the sect of savages who even lost their rank? Do you want to declare war on us 7 sects? Are you willing to fight us all 7 alone? Mortar uttered dominantly. Who said he is alone? A thunderous voice resounded, and everyone looked in the direction where the voice came from. 3 men were floating as they moved towards the envoys. A terrifying presence could be seen around the frontman. He was a 7 feet tall man, and his muscles were more like boulders. Mortar, who was the strongest amongst the 7 sacred sects envoys, was 6 feet 7 inches tall. But now, he looked like a dwarf in front of this man. Black smoke-type sleeveless GI was worn by him, his thick and big arms were palpable. Besides him was a brown man, who was slightly shorter than him. He was the bearman who worked for Brown Man Empire as an independent martial master and got defeated by Feroza. His name was Fomiad. The third figure was looking below to where Ezra was, his eyes glued on Ezra. It's His Majesty. King Mirza has arrived. All hail King Mirza. Hail the king! The cheers echoed and an uproar arose. Ezra, my son, uttered Mirza, his tone was grave. Who attacked you just now? He asked. The envoy of Holy Law Gate, he is right there. Ezra pointed at him, he was smiling. A strange burst of happiness arose in his heart, one that he never felt before. Haha, so you will attack the envoy of Holy Law Gate first? Chuckled Mortar. FLLAAA. Mortar saw a white fire chi in front of his face. No, it is me, who will attack Dragon Bone Pavilion's envoy first. BHAAMM. Canine fists who loved battles attacked first, lobbing Mortar away with the impact. Bang boom bomb dum. He went on, collided against various hills and trees, and crumbled them in his course. The eyes of every witness almost popped out. Mortar, who was the strongest, was tossed like that. Who is that man? They all ponder. But before a second could pass, the envoy of Holy Law Gate stood back, he gritted his teeth and growled. At the same time, Blade found the opportunity to slash Feroza. He unsheathed his swords and zipped towards the canine fists. CLANNG. His swords hit a metallic gauntlet, it was of almond color. Your opponent will be me, Fomiad said. Seeing that Dionys moved his hand as he was chanting. Boom. Hee, please me for a while, said Zephyr. You savages must be wiped off of this land, retorted Dionys. Meanwhile, Mirza Zephyr ogled Levos with killing intent. He unsheathed his sword, a terrifying pyre was released as if the demon of blaze broke out from the prison. Art of Fire C. Mirza uttered and a slash of fire was released. The remaining 3 of the 7 sacred sects were quietly watching. The Prince of Ezra Zephyr was looking at them, his heart was pounding as his feeling of excitement reached the pinnacle. Forces of the Bloodfang Kingdom were fighting toe-to-toe against the envoys of 7 sects. At that moment another voice resounded, the voice of a lady, soft yet quaking. Stop. Everyone who was fighting was stunned, Mirza's pyre extinguished and he couldn't move, everyone thought of one thing. Spiritual transformation expert. A soul-glowing light descended. I am the 7th guardian of the continent, the 7 sects have violated the law and treaty. All 7 sects must pay for the damages, mentally and or physically, caused to Bloodfang Kingdom. She said without wasting any time. Levos knew what that means, he cried as he heard, no, it's wrong. I did dash. Quiet. Do not dare to fool me, child, I am older than your sect master, she replied, her soft voice containing a demonic aura. You cannot do this to us. Opposed Levos, all the other envoys, looked at him. I cannot do this to you? A mere outer sect elder is sassing me. I should visit Holy Law Gate. I apologize on the behalf of Levos, please be lenient, 7th Guardian. Holy Law Sect will pay the damages. A mysterious voice came, but only 2 people heard it, one was the 7th Guardian and the other was Levos. He flinched and remained quiet. The 7th Guardian was nothing but an entity of light, her voice was feminine. She said after being quiet for a while. You 3, back off. Her words were aimed at the 3 nascent soul experts from Bloodfang. As you wish, 7th Guardian. Mirza bowed and backed away. He was a literate man and knew the changes in atmosphere with her arrival. It would be unwise of him to go against her order. Her eagle eye goggled Mirza before she said. Don't be happy just because you best an outer sect elder, every single envoy is an outer sect elder. You would have been turned into dust if an inner sect elder has showed up. Pharaoh clenched his fist, he knew the 7th Guardian was disrespecting the sovereign side of the continent. But he stayed quiet. 7th Guardian, kindly watch your words. The one who spoke was Ezra Zephyr. The entire ground became pin-drop silent. Our kingdom belongs to 2nd Hall, not 7th Hall, and they dared to break the rules we just defended. Don't threaten us, we are aware of the extent of their power, but we won't back down even if that means extinction. The entire continent knows that we of Bloodfang Kingdom take our revenge. The entirety of the people looked at him like he is some insane brainless lad. However, this was only what Levos was thinking. The other envoys looked at Ezra as a being capable of turning the lower realm upside down. They were not even aware of his martial spirit, yet he gave them such an impression. But they couldn't recruit it as they have gotten one of the top geniuses. Only Holy Law Gate and Dua Mountain Sect were left to select the geniuses. The 7th Guardian asked the question. How did these 3 get here? Ezra didn't know what to say, he could not take the name of Bipasha equally. Seeing Ezra in silence, the sexy lady moved to speak. Honorable 7th Guardian, our 2nd Hall will investigate this matter as the Bloodfang Kingdom comes under our jurisdiction. Who are you? 7th Guardian was irritated. Bipasha equally, one of the direct descendants. The sexy lady replied. 7th Guardian didn't say anything and vanished after hearing that. Just a few seconds later, her voice resounded. All 7 sacred sects must pay a considerable amount for damages to the Bloodfang Kingdom, or else, 10 guardians will visit the 7 sacred sects. Equilibrium between the 2 sides of the continent must not break. The populace placed was dumbfounded, they were all ogling the Prince of Bloodfang. Bipasha turned towards Mirza and the other 2. You Highnesses, how did you get here? I have to investigate you all for formal purposes, please follow me. Her tone was respectful. The father and son silently exchanged a look back with a smile, they accomplished what they come from. Feroza also winked at his grandson and said. Keep surprising the world, grandson, ha ha ha. I will, grandfather. He replied. Soon, all the uninvited guests left the vicinity and only young martial masters and sex envoys were left. Seeing the opportunity, Zephyr said. Prince Ezra, would you like to join our Spirit Devouring Mountain? The world around fell silent, waiting for Ezra Zephyr's answer. But just as the werewolf prince was about to speak, the Holy Law Gate's envoy, Levos, suddenly intercepted. Ezra, if you enter my Holy Law Sect, we will let you off for killing Victor Brownmane. Moreover, you should know that my Holy Law Sect is currently the strongest in Naren continent. Once you enter, you will naturally receive guidance and tutelage. If Ezra had any brains, he should know what to choose. The truth was that Levos had spoken these words not because he thought highly of Ezra Zephyr. After all, it was only a selection from geniuses of a tiny Naren continent. He started to conspire against Ezra the moment later killed Victor Brownmane. And the reason Levos gave such an offer was to avoid paying the damages. The amount was not an issue, but the stain of disrespect that a first-degree sect had to pay damages to a third-world kingdom was immense. Ezra was like a single raindrop, and the sects were akin to skyscraping bulky mountains. How could he possibly threat them? It was just an excuse to kill someone they don't like. However, this was only what Levos was thinking. The other envoys looked at Ezra as a being capable of turning the lower realm upside down. They were not even aware of his martial spirit, yet he gave them such an impression. But they couldn't recruit it as they have gotten one of the top geniuses. Only Holy Law Gate and Dua Mountain Sect were left to select the genius for them. That's why they wanted him dead instead of letting other sects have him. Let him off? It's his fault for not being good enough and getting himself killed. Just who do you intend to not let off? Zephyr sneered. Levos ignored him, merely continuing to look down at Ezra Zephyr. Gaze after gaze all turned towards the Prince of Bloodfang Kingdom. Under the watching eyes of the crowd, Ezra chuckled and lifted his head to look at him. I appreciate the envoy's thoughtfulness, but Holy Law Sect's requirements are too high, and I'm afraid that I won't be able to reach them. After finishing, he looked towards Zephyr and said, I wish to join the Spirit Devouring Mountain. His voice echoed across the area. Levos' expression instantly turned dark and cold, fury appearing in his eyes, but he didn't say anything. Ezra, you can join Dua Mountain Peak as well. I am ashamed for not recruiting you earlier. Orama finally spoke to him, his expression was genuine. I have made my choice, retorted Ezra. Orama sked and continued. Our sect is at war with Spirit Devouring Mountain. We took its position of the first-degree sect. That mountain of savages is dying. In 2 years, there will be an all-out war and only one of the two sects will remain. Be wise. Zephyr didn't say anything, he just stared at Ezra. The prince looked at Orama and said, I will be ready in 2 years. Zephyr grinned. What a devil. Ezra looked at Zephyr and asked, Senior, can you make a sound barrier? Xavier's eyes twitched and he created a spiritual energy shell around the two of them. I announced that I'll join your sect, but I have a certain condition. You also have to take all of my subjects. 311 in total, all have 5th grade martial spirit, said Ezra. Zephyr smiled and said, Why not? However, it's not 311 but 312. He gestured at XYR, who was looking at Ezra with a calm face. Ezra didn't say anything and cast his sight at Zephyr again. Thank you, Senior. What should we do now? Zephyr said, From now on, the two of you can be said to be the entry-level disciples of the Spirit Devouring Mountain. In a few days, I will bring you 2 out of this region of guardians and head to the Spirit Devouring Mountain. Ezra Zephyr hesitated for a moment as he turned his head towards the south, where the Bloodfang Kingdom was located. Are you worried about the Brownmane Empire? Asked Zephyr when he saw this. He had evidently found out pretty much everything with regards to Ezra Zephyr. The prince nodded. Although his father had already been freed from the shadow that used to haunt him and was gradually recovering his strength, it was still not enough to put up a fight against the Empire. Moreover, the Brownmane Empire's power far surpassed the Bloodfang Kingdom. He had defeated Victor Brownmane and taken back some of the sacred dragon blessing. Once Emperor Bruce found out, he would definitely be enraged. Ezra was afraid that Emperor Bruce would turn his fury to the Bloodfang Kingdom, and the former did not wish to see a broken Bloodfang when he returned. I wonder how things are progressing with Mother Tree. Only if we could calmly spend few years and let the youth grow under the blessings of Mother Tree, the Bloodfang Kingdom's power would surely grow tremendously. When that happens, we may not need to overly fear the Brownmane Empire, thought Ezra. Zephyr lit a cigar with his finger, puffed out the smoke and said, I will send someone to keep an eye on the Brownmane Empire, so you need not worry too much. He then looked at Ezra. Besides this, you should also know that Brownmane Empire is pretty strong, and has likely dozens of nascent soul experts. Your kingdom on the other hand doesn't have more than 3 practitioners at this level. A single nascent soul expert is enough to change everything. If you want your kingdom to possess the power to contend with the Brownmane Empire, you'll need power that matches the nascent soul stage. The Spirit Devouring Mountain is one of the strongest sects in the Narran continent. Only there will you be able to truly spread your wings and grow to become a true powerhouse. That's why you need to grasp this chance. The Bloodfang Kingdom was just too small for him, and staying there would instead limit his growth. Even the most talented eagle would ultimately descend into mediocrity if trapped in a cage. I know, Ezra nodded, his hands slowly clenching as he peered into the distance. Father, Mother, although I can't bear to leave you, as the saying goes, an eagle will one day have to leave its nest. But don't worry, when I return to the Bloodfang Kingdom, I will personally take back everything our Bloodfang Kingdom has lost. So you must wait for my return. High up in the sky, the clouds were suddenly torn open as a giant shadow zoomed past. The shadow cleanly cut layer after layer of cloud into two, its speed as fast as a shooting star. At closer inspection, one would discover that it was a giant boat. Countless ancient patterns had been carved into the boat's body, giving off magnificent spiritual energy undulations. The boat was known as a Stormbreaker shuttle. It was a treasure used for rapid long-distance traveling and boasted extremely high speeds. In addition, it could withstand numerous natural elements, allowing it to travel freely. On the giant boat was a beautiful flower picture, indicating that it belonged to the Veiled Virgin Valley. The passengers on board were the many envoys and the chosen geniuses from the Narran continent. The region of Guardians was extremely far from the region where the 7 sacred sects were situated, and not all the regions along the way were equipped with teleportation arrays. Therefore, the only option was to travel through these continents. However, there were strong astral winds between the continents, which could only be crossed by a vessel such as the Stormbreaker shuttle. Trying to cross without one was extremely exhausting, and not a feat that ordinary people would be capable of. Given the martial prowess of Ezra Zephyr and the rest, they clearly did not possess the qualifications to cross between continents. On a certain level on the giant boat, Xavier was seated cross-legged as he puffed his cigar. Before him were Ezra, Zulfi, Shifa, Argus, Thur, XYR, and the other hundreds or so geniuses of Bloodfang that had been chosen to enter the Spirit Devouring Mountain. Ezra was seated at the front, clearly the leader of the group. In the small group behind them was a familiar figure. It was a man named Sinzutun, the man who once troubled Ezra and Thur in the auction, following the lead of Salim Ukwali and Emily Jomez. At the very beginning, Thur, who remembered him, had been rather astonished that he had managed to enter the Spirit Devouring Mountain. Later on, Xavier explained that he had given his permission because the Zutun clan leader had personally pleaded. Although Thur was not really fond of the guy who had given him and his prince quite a bit of trouble in the auction. Surprisingly, he did not join hands with Salim Ukwali in Spirity Bailiwick. After all, following Ezra's rise in strength, Sinzutun was no longer a threat. Sinzutun was a smart individual and knew that his status as the clan's young master was useless here. Hence, he was much more well-behaved on their journey, as if afraid that Prince Ezra would target him. At our current speed, we should reach the demonic mountain in a month. Do all of you know of the demonic mountain? Xavier felt that it was a good time to teach these little ones some common knowledge. Everyone shook their heads. Xavier sighed and began to explain, the demonic mountain is the largest mountain in the Narran continent. Legend says all of the other big mountains nearby were split off from demonic mountain during another worldly battle. At that point, a fight came to Ezra's mind. The fight between Spirit Devouring Mountain and Dragonkin Ayrton Magnus. Xavier was perpetual, hence, if one were to say that the total minerals of other sects were 10, Demonic Mountain would be blessed with 60%. That's why it has been called the gathering place of material. The Demonic Mountain's vastness is far beyond your imagination, and there are 7 peaks that have been established there. After spending a good part of the day talking, Xavier took one final puff of smoke, before he glanced at the group and slowly said, besides all this, there is something I should tell all of you. Although you guys were selected by me, it does not mean that you will be able to truly become disciples of the Spirit Devouring Mountain. These words caused everyone's expression to freeze for a moment. There are millions of continents in the lower realm, and the geniuses of these continents will also be selected by the Spirit Devouring Mountain. At the end of the day, the number of new disciples will likely be over 10,000. These individuals are the same as yourselves, each one an outstanding elite in their respective continents. After you guys arrive at the Spirit Devouring Sect, all of the new disciples will have 3 months to acclimatize and train. After which will be the peak selection ceremony. And only by passing the peak selection ceremony would you be allowed to enter one of the 7 peaks, and formally become disciples of the Spirit Devouring Mountain. About half of the participants will be eliminated during the peak selection ceremony. In other words, likely half or even more of you guys will be eliminated. These individuals can only become recorded disciples, which may only train outside the peaks. Only after making sufficient contributions will they be permitted to join the 7 peaks. Upon hearing these words, even Ezra Zephyr's eyes widened slightly. To think that half would be eliminated looks like it wasn't so easy to enter the Spirit Devouring Mountain. The atmosphere in the room became much heavier in the wake of Xavier's previous words. The other geniuses, including XYR and the rest of Bloodfang Kingdom martial masters, had taunt expressions, uncertainty coloring their eyes. They were indeed the cream of the crop amongst the Naren continent's younger generation, but the ones they were up against now were also elites in their respective continents. In fact, their competitors would likely even include those who are from Shurian continent. Xavier had explained earlier that among all the continents they are in contact with, Shurian continent is full of geniuses. The selected men listened to every word of Xavier. Despite the fact that Spirit Devouring Mountain resides in Naren continent, he is brazenly praising other continents. They had left the Bloodfang Kingdom for what they viewed in their hearts as the holy land of martial prowess, their families and clans placing all their hopes upon them. If they failed to become formal disciples, it would be a huge blow to their confidence. They won't be able to face their king and prince, who did so much for them. Xavier swept a look at the group but did not say anything to console them. The Spirit Devouring Mountain standards were exceedingly strict, and not just anyone could become a formal disciple. They are also called savages by other sects. In between, there were naturally those who ended up laughing, and those who ended up in tears. When you guys reach the Spirit Devouring Mountain, all of the new disciples will be divided into categories: first-class disciples, second-class disciples, and third-class disciples. Is there a difference? Asked the Ergale Arms. Of course, there's a difference. Xavier chuckled. First-class disciples will not only be given their own personal hut but even have a spiritual rune boundary inscribed in the area, making the spiritual energy more abundant and concentrated, far surpassing the huts of the other disciples. Staying in such a place will naturally bring many benefits. In addition, first-class disciples will be granted a bag of spiritual food by the sect every week. Daily consumption will temper the body and speed up martial prowess. Of course, the other cultivation resources for first-class disciples will also exceed the ordinary disciples. Spiritual food? Sun Zutton could not help but cry out when he heard these 2 words as his breathing began to intensify. One must know that spiritual food is very rare. It consists of the meat of martial animals and some specific vegetables and fruits which are grown in highly spiritual energy concentrated areas. Ezra, on the other hand, was completely calm. He has been eating spiritual food for 5 years during his training. Though his talent and hard work were the main factors that contributed to his rapid progress in a short 2 years, the external factors such as cultivation resources could not be neglected. Hence why he was not taken aback when he heard that one could consume spiritual food as daily meals in the Spirit Devouring Mountain. The rest were truly unable to imagine how insanely beneficial long-term consumption of spiritual food would be. Xavier was all smiles as he looked towards the group, his gaze ultimately pausing on Ezra's handsome face. However, I'm afraid that the only one amongst you guys that can be rated as a first-class disciple is Ezra Zephyr. Although the Prince of Bloodfang had not revealed his martial spirit, Xavier could sense that the strength of his soul had likely reached a high level. As for you 5. Xavier turned towards XYR, Zulfi Dimitri, Shifa Pista, Argus Waska, and their Ergale Arm. Based on your martial prowess in Spirity Bailiwick and Spirit Grade, I'm sure that you will make it to second-class disciple. As for the rest, they will be third class at most, with some failing. That's why all of you should not have the mindset that you will be able to smoothly enter the Spirit Devouring Mountain just because you were selected by me. If you slack off on your training and end up being eliminated, there will be no one to blame but yourselves. Remember to be ruthless and greedy, your hunger will make you grow. Once you officially join a peak to become the outer disciple, you will find yourself in a wild with various ferocious beasts eyeing your resources. Xavier's warning made the hearts of the numerous geniuses shiver. They knew that they had been taking it too easy recently, and had even slacked off on their prowess. No one dared to tarry, immediately acknowledging one after another. A bright moon hung high in the sky. A giant boat smoothly shot past. Several figures were silently seated around a circular tablet near the front of the boat. They were Fairy Hololeth, Acker Boldheart, John Stark, and even Leomord Tigerian, XYR, plus some top members of Bloodfang. Fairy Hololeth wanted to have a gathering before they split up. To their surprise, all geniuses of Naren continent had joined in. All of them clearly understood that no matter how famous they previously were on the sovereign side of the Naren continent, the halo they used to have would now fade upon reaching the Sects. Their future paths would have to be forged by themselves. No one knew whether or not they will once again ascend the peak or return to mediocrity. The two girls talked and laughed at one side, while Ezra raised his cup and smiled at John Stark. I've been wanting to thank you for some time. If not for your help on this selection, those envoys would have likely taken more efforts to eradicate me. John Stark looked at him as he too raised a cup and emptied it. Before his voice sounded, it was because you gave me something special as well. If you want to thank me, let me use you to polish my sword if there comes a chance in future. Ezra Zephyr grinned and said in a carefree manner, I'll accompany you any time. Zulfi's eyes glowed when he heard this, unable to stop himself from saying, Fair sword, when that time comes, have a good battle with me too. John turned his gaze to Zulfi and looked at him in amazement. Despite the fact that my spirit is one grade higher than yours, your swordplay is no inferior to mine, and I said that in envy as you have no scar on your face. He touched his pretty face, which was scarred by sword wounds. Zulfi smiled and showed his respect. Acker chugged down the wine and spoke to Ezra. Fight me as well, I want to see your power. We can go at it now too. Ezra chuckled. Acker froze a little, shaking his head as he said, I doubt I'll be able to beat you now. You are even stronger than when you fought Carlo Aur. Although the dwarf was a battle maniac, his senses were extremely sharp. Thus, he could tell that Ezra was on a whole other level compared to when he had fought Carlo Aur, because he devoured his soul and spirit. By the side, the Princess of Elfpatria placed her hand on her chin, smiling as she looked at the Prince of Bloodfang. Ezra, I heard that there are more disciples in the Spirit Devouring Mountain than fish in the river, almost too many to count. You'd better not let yourself vanish into the crowd, making it such that I won't even hear of your name. So what if you do hear his name, are you going to tell others that he's the groom you chose? Acker chuckled. Fairy Hololeth's eyes swirled in thought, charmingly enchanting as she boldly declared, if his name truly does spread in the Spirit Devouring Mountain, I won't lose out if I tell others that he's a potential groom I have my eye on. That's why you've got to work hard, Ezra Zephyr. The enchantress grinned widely. There was a faint smirk on Ezra's face as he looked at the beautiful figure and charming face of Fairy Hololeth, but then he sighed as he thought about the adventure that was about to come. The truth was that he knew. He knew that everyone was feeling some pressure after realizing the future challenges they will face. Ezra Zephyr took out 3 scrolls and gave them to Leomord, Acker, and Fairy. These are martial arts, you will know what a martial art is when you read and learn it. Fairy, your body is elastic and fragile, learn this, and you will be untouchable. Tigermen, we both were enemies at first, but at the end of the day, we are both beastmen of Naren continent. This martial art will hone your claws, and one day you might tear the sky open. Acker of Dwarven Empire, you chose Myriad Miracle Tower. This scroll contains a martial art that is made for a person like you, from smashing skulls to bending steel, this is perfect for you. They looked at Akash, with their mouth agape and eyes wide open. Ezra raised his cup, He was the only one drinking tea while the other cups had wine, his gaze sweeping across everyone. After a brief silence, he smiled. Friends, who have stood beside me in battle. Although our Naren continent is a tiny place, when we one day stand at the pinnacle of the lower realm's younger generation, they will know how amazing that tiny Naren continent actually is. Everyone, I hope to see all of you again at the peak. Under the rays of the moon, that young, winsome face wore a calm smile as his black long coat fluttered. It was as if an inextinguishable flame burned in his scarlet eyes, a sight that would slightly move anyone's heart. When Fairy's glittering green eyes gazed at Ezra Zephyr at that moment, she was a little surprised that the usually wild young man would have such an eye-raising attraction. Jon Stark, Aker Boldheart and Leomord Tigerian felt the blood in their bodies stir slightly before they lifted their cups and smashed them together. Haha, alright then, let's see how many of us will shake the lower realm in a few years. The passionate voices of these youth were filled with the carefreeness of the young. Ezra accomplished another thing in the short amount of time. All of these were geniuses who were selected by top 7 sections. Their future was bright before as well. One was Fair Sword of Human Empire, other was Youngest Prince of Striped Beast Empire, the dwarf represented the Dwarven Empire's young generation and the lady was the only princess of Elf Patria. They would be of huge help in future if nurtured right, so Ezra gave them something special to stand taller in the crowd. He was already planning about how to unite the empires and kingdoms. At the top floor on the giant boat, Orama, the beautiful woman in palace garbs and the other few envoys seemed to sweep their gazes below, before they exchanged a look and let out a soft chuckle. How nice to be young, said Rubab, envoy of Veiled Virgin Valley and the owner of Storm-Breaking Shuttle. The Veiled Valley is at the very end of continent, all others come along the way. So they pay hefty amount of spiritual stones to get on it. Nearby, there was a sinister look in Levo's eyes as a mocking and disdainful smile rose from the corners of his mouth. What a bunch of foolish country bumpkins. This continent is only worth living because our 7 sects are here, let them come and see the true chosen from other continents, you will know how laughable your promise looked today. His eyes landed on the Prince of Bloodfang Kingdom. Don't worry, foolish werewolf, after I return and report everything to the sect master, the chosens from my holy law sect will likely crush your pitiful confidence to pieces. Hee, I really look forward to that day. Time swiftly flowed as they traveled. On a certain day, in one of the holding quarters of the ship, Ezra's shut eyes suddenly opened, breaking him out of his gentility. He had suddenly sensed some strange activity in the surrounding spiritual energy, which seemed to be stirring violently. At the same time, numerous cheers could be heard outside the room. Ezra Zephyr opened the windows and looked outside. The thick layers of clouds were being torn apart as an extremely distant land began to appear. His heart trembled slightly when his gaze fell upon it. He could sense an extremely concentrated and boundless natural spiritual energy filling the sky above the land. Its concentration level far surpassed that of any place Ezra had visited before. Except for one, his very own kingdom, which now has the mother tree. The Bloodfang Kingdom surpassed every sect in terms of spiritual energy's thickness and enormity. But the current place was lacking behind only to the Bloodfang Kingdom. In addition, the spiritual energy seemed to slip between various forms and shapes, giving off a spontaneously unique feeling, as if it was a blessing and right belonging only to them. Ezra seemed to realize something as he looked at a monstrous skyscraping mountain whose peak was hidden in the sky. He mumbled to himself, is this the demonic mountain that enjoys 60% of the entire lower realm's minerals? It was indeed vast and practically limitless. In a place like this, even if 2 people had similar talent, the one who trained here would achieve far more than the one in any other sect. In a certain sense, the entire region was basically an indescribably enormous martial gentility paradise. No wonder Senior Xavier told us the geniuses here would be exceedingly arrogant. If you grew up here, geniuses from other regions would indeed look like country bumpkins. Ezra smiled wickedly. Knock knock. While the prince was sighing, the sound of knocking was heard from the door. Ezra called out to come in, and the door quickly opened, revealing a round face that smiled charmingly at Ezra. Your Majesty, Senior Xavier told us to get ready. Once we reach the region of Spirit Devouring Mountain, we'll be leaving the boat and heading towards the demonic mountain. The one at the door was a little fatty. Though a smile was usually present on his face, light often flickered brightly in his small eyes, an indication of his exceptional brilliance. The little fatty was called Gil Subzi and was also one of the geniuses from the geniuses of Bloodfang Kingdom. His Subzi family is prominent in alchemy, equipped with wealth that could match entire kingdoms. They were the main source of trade during the crises. However, they were respected by the royal family because the Subzi family is a family of gnomes, not beastmen, yet they stayed in Bloodfang. Gil was given the 5th grade spirit cubic pill and awakened a poison-based spirit. Of course, this did not mean the little fatty was weak, or that he was only selected by Ezra's recommendation. He was a third circle sorcerer. Ever since Xavier's warning, the Naren's geniuses had understood that their previous status in their homeland would no longer be valid in the sect, making them extremely ordinary instead. In fact, they may not even be able to become formal disciples of the Spirit Devouring Mountain. The cruel reality was a wake-up call for everyone. Most of them began to train frantically, hoping to at least raise their strength a little before reaching the Spirit Devouring Mountain, so as to avoid becoming a third-class disciple and be looked down upon by others. On the other hand, this little fatty, Gil Subzi, had chosen the most direct and efficient method, relying on Ezra Zephyr. The little fatty had practically become Ezra's servant during this period, obediently abiding his every command, not that any other would not, but this guy was overdoing it. With regards to this, Ezra could laugh. However, he was pretty surprised by Gil Subzi's decisiveness to give everything up just like that. Although he was nothing special to look at, he was clearly still very talented, especially in alchemy and business. After spending some time together over this period, Ezra found that Gil Subzi was actually pretty straightforward. There was no beating about the bush, but instead a direct declaration. Your Majesty, I'm not good at fighting, I'm here to grab a hold of you with all my might. I'm yours from now onwards, so please do shelter me. Ezra smiled and nodded. After tidying up a bit, he walked out of the door, heading towards the bow of the ship with Gil Subzi. As they walked, Ezra swept a glance at Gil Subzi and said with a smile, I say, you're the young master of the Subzi family after all, and your family is nothing but wealthier than my royal family. Why is there a need for this? You are already a 5th grade spirit holder. Gil Subzi beamed in response. Your Majesty, do you know what my Subzi family places the most emphasis on? 2 words: good judgment. My family is fond of making friends, regardless of whether they are strong or weak. That's why my family has the most friends in and outside of Bloodfang Kingdom. As for how to choose those worthy of investing in from amongst these friends, it would depend on one's judgment ability. I may be mediocre in every other aspect, but I'm confident in my ability to judge. From what I can see, you'll definitely become akin to a shark in water inside the Spirit Devouring Mountain in the future. So I'm choosing to help you now, not that you need it, but to create some good karma. Who knows, Your Majesty may become my most successful investment in the future, said Gil Subzi in a pleased manner as he rubbed his fat belly. As for myself, although my cultivation talent is not as good as yours, I do know a thing or two about business and alchemy. Your Majesty, you only need to be my backer, while I earn the cash, and then we'll split the profits. Won't this be a happy cooperation? Upon seeing that he had even written the entire story in his head, Ezra Zephyr could only smile and sigh. What a talent. The thing is, Subzi family can easily leave the Bloodfang Kingdom. They migrated to Bloodfang because it was an open field for them to do business. They were about to leave when they saw the sudden uprise of Bloodfang and chose to stay. Later, the family head was offered a cubic spirit pill and thought to shove his youngest son Gil, who still had the youth to walk on martial prowess, into the line of power. However, Ezra had to admit that he was a little moved by this proposal. He clearly understood just how important martial prowess resources were, and most of the time, one needed to use spiritual crystals to purchase them. Now that he had already left the Bloodfang Kingdom, he would have to rely on himself without emptying the cave of Fenrir. It was true that he did not know much about how to make money from money. every bit of spiritual crystals he used would only deplete his supply. If Gil Subzi was able to help him earn money to purchase cultivation resources, it would be a pretty good collaboration. Because he also brought more than 300 martial masters with himself. While the two talked, they soon arrived at the head of the ship, only to find Zephyr seated at the very front, while the rest was already there. Upon seeing Ezra Zephyr walk over, the other geniuses cast friendly gazes towards him. The other martial masters knew that he would definitely become a first-class disciple, making his status higher than their own. Hence, they needed to create good relations with him as soon as possible. However, they were evidently unable to be as straightforward as Gil Subzi, instead still holding on to some of the aloofness from before. At the head of the boat, Zephyr took a puff of his pipe after seeing that everyone was here, before he unhurriedly said, "In half a day, we will reach the territory of Spirit Devouring Mountain. When that happens, you guys will leave the boat with me and head for the Sect." Everyone nodded with solemn expressions. After speaking, Zephyr closed his eyes to rest, while the others seated themselves in silence. Half a day passed, and a tremor was suddenly felt. They had finally entered the region of Spirit Devouring Mountain. Zephyr stood up and gave his cigar a shake, causing smoke to rise. The smoke transformed into a several hundred feet wide cloud that floated outside the boat. His actions resembled the envoy of Dua Mountain Peak, Arama. Despite the fact both were mortal enemies. "Let's go." Zephyr moved, appearing on the grey cloud. Ezra Zephyr, XYR, and the rest also got onto the cloud one after another. As he stood atop the grey cloud, the prince lifted his head and gazed at the giant boat, where several figures were looking towards them from the side of the boat. They were John Stark, Ferry Hololeth, Acker Boldheart, Leomord Tigerian and the rest. "Prince Ezra and Bloodfawn companions, take care." Acker waved his dwarf hands. Ferry laughed enchantingly, before she smiled and said, "Ezra, I'll be waiting for the day your name resounds across the lower realm." Ezra smirked and nodded while Lord Gailarms cupped his fists together at them and grinned, his eyes lowering slightly as he softly said, "Everyone, let's work hard together." Ezra gave him an impressive stare. "Quite diplomatic, aren't you?" To which Thur's grin stretched. With a deep breath, he turned around and sat down, giving a little wave with his hand towards the back. Zephyr gave his cigar a tap and the grey cloud ferrying everyone shot forth, disappearing into the horizon in a mere few breaths. On the cloud, Ezra's eyes narrowed slightly, anticipation and excitement surging out within them. Spirit Devouring Mountain, I really look forward to it. Time passed, the grey cloud flitted across the sky with a whoosh. Ezra and the rest were seated atop the cloud, their gazes full of curiosity as they observed the vast land before them. Ever since entering the region of Spirit Devouring Mountain, the other martial masters could clearly feel that the spiritual energy here far surpassed the region of their sovereignities. Even the martial masters of Bloodfawn had the same reaction because they were already other side of portal when Mother Tree was planted. Moreover, they could see for themselves how vast this region was. 8 days had passed since they left the storm-breaking shuttle, every day spent rushing without rest. They had already lost track of how many cities they had passed, and how many teleportation arrays they had used, not even knowing how many hundreds and thousands of miles each jump had covered. Even so, they had yet to reach their destination. Such vastness really opened their eyes. All of a sudden, Zephyr opened his mouth and said, "We'll reach the Spirit Devouring Mountain tomorrow." These words were akin to pumping a surge of energy through the masses. Although they had not used any spiritual energy during the past 8 days of travel, it was still a rather tiring affair. Fortunately, their destination was finally within sight. As such, a day swiftly passed under an atmosphere of bubbling anticipation. When the sun rose high into the sky the next day, the resting Ezra and gang suddenly felt the surrounding spiritual energy become stronger. They immediately opened their eyes, and saw mist swirling in between countless ancient mountain ranges, each giant peak like a titan that could hold up the sky. Amongst the giant mountains, one would faintly see countless halls, pavilions, and other buildings, the misty feeling seemingly filled with a celestial aura. Meanwhile, countless figures of light rapidly shuttled between. Spiritual imprints were faintly discernible high up in the sky. These spiritual imprints were connected to each other, forming an enormous spiritual rune boundary. The boundary stretched downwards, covering the innumerable mountain ranges. Power that could not be described spread from them. Although they were only slivers and strands, they gave rise to strange fear within Ezra Zephyr. The grey cloud under Xavier's feet approached the spiritual rune boundary. Rays of light shined from it, as if checking his identity. Moments later, a crack peeled open in the boundary. Xavier directed the grey cloud in. The moment they entered, Ezra Zephyr and the rest immediately felt the world around them become fresher and clearer. Concentrated spiritual energy flowed into their bodies along with the air, wave after wave washing through their bodies. What a paradise! There could not help but praise. Training here would undoubtedly be amazing for one's cultivation. The others curiously asked, "Is this the Spirit Devouring Mountain?" "This is only the outer mountains of the Sect." Xavier chuckled. "Only after you guys pass the peak selection ceremony will you be able to see the Spirit Devouring Mountain's true face. Next, I'll bring you guys to the gathering point for the new disciples." By the time his words faded, he had already driven the grey cloud past several towering mountains. Dozens of minutes later, their speed began to slow as an extremely magnificent mountain appeared within their sights. At the waist of the mountain was a gigantic plaza. A seemingly endless stream of light figures were flying over from every direction and landing on the plaza, making it appear extremely busy. When Xavier landed the green cloud on the plaza, a man in Spirit Devouring Mountain's robe approached and welcomed them with a smile. "You're finally here, Elder Xavier. Yours is already the last batch of new disciples." "Can't help it, the Spirity Bailiwick lasted too long." Xavier waved his hand, before turning his head to look at the group behind him. "Ezra, follow me. The others wait here." The martial masters of Bloodfang were worried but didn't say anything. After finishing, he led the two of them towards a building at the back of the plaza. "Who is in charge of this new batch of Outer Mountain disciples?" Along the way, Xavier asked the Spirit Devouring Mountain's disciple that had welcomed them earlier. "Elder Ian, from the Heavenly Rune Peak," answered the disciple. "Ian?" Xavier's brows furrowed slightly, but he did not say anything else. They passed through the plaza, arrived before the building and pushed the doors open. "Hee, I was wondering who it was." "So it's you, old Xavier. Your efficiency is really not that good, you're the last to return this time." Ezra Zephyr looked over, only to find that the one who had spoken was a thin middle-aged man. Though he was smiling, there was a feeling of evil intentions behind it. Xavier retorted, "Want to try going to the Spirity Bailiwick? How can anyone good come from such a remote place? What's the point in going?" The man called Ian smiled in an insincere manner. Xavier could not be bothered with him, pointing at Ezra Zephyr as he said, "This one is the new disciple from the Naren continent. He needs one first-class disciple quota." Ian shot a look at the two and frowned, a difficult look emerging on his face as he said, "Old Xavier, you returned too late. The number of new disciples this time has already exceeded the limit. There are not many first-class disciple quotas, and all of them have been reserved in advance." Ian suggested with a wave of his hand, "How about I gave him the second-class disciple quota?" Xavier's cigar slammed into the table as he coldly snorted, "Don't give me that crap. Who doesn't know of your methods? Have you secretly exchanged away the first-class disciple quotas?" Yin's thin face turned rather ugly. "What are you saying? Why should I give this boy a first-class quota? His martial prowess is only at the first-level core formation stage. He doesn't have the qualifications." Xavier could not be bothered to reply. Instead, he retrieved the token from his pocket and tossed it to Ian. Ian caught the token, his eyes widening slightly when he glanced at it and muttered in confusion, "How can a weak youngster like him earn the first rank in Spirity Bailiwick?" This token indicated to the first ranker of Spirity Bailiwick that he could enter first class without any questions. This rule has been established since ancient times but never used because none of the previous first rankers had joined Spirit Devouring Mountain. Yin's gaze flickered for a moment. He looked towards Ezra Zephyr and sincerely said, "Little fellow, I can give you a first-class disciple quota, but I should also let you know that the competition between the new disciples is extremely intense. I feel that you may not be able to hold on to this quota with your first-level strength, and will only become a target for the other disciples. Therefore, I feel that it will be most appropriate for you to take a second-class disciple quota first, and when your strength rises in the future, I will immediately upgrade you to first class." How does that sound? He was clearly intending for Ezra to voluntarily give up his first-class disciple quota. The Prince of Werewolves merely chuckled upon hearing this. "Many thanks to Senior for your consideration, however, I always welcome trouble with open arms." There was some dudgeon on his face as he helplessly retrieved a booklet and registered Ezra Zephyr's information. "Alright, you can go now. When the new disciples assembly later and the classes are announced, you will know just how much trouble you brought upon yourself." Ian waved his hands to chase them off. Xavier was clearly at loggerheads with the former. He immediately led the prince away. Upon seeing their leaving figures, Ian threw the booklet onto the table as disdain rose from the corners of his mouth. "Foolish kid, you don't know what's good for you and refuse to listen to my good advice. Since that is so, I'll be waiting to see how many days you will be able to hold on to that first-class disciple status." The prince followed Xavier out of the building before the latter smiled at the two of them and said, "I'll have to go hand in my report. You guys will be staying here for the next 3 months. Many thanks to Senior Xavier for receiving us from so far away." Ezra bowed to Xavier. Although the latter had been tasked by the sect to head to the Naren continent, it could still be considered a favor to them. In addition, Xavier had stood up when the 7 sacred sects envoys were being overbearing. Another reason was that he wanted to see the sect that was once the superpower of this continent and whose master fought against the first disciple of Bjorn Zephyr. He looked at Xavier and he could feel that the latter was quite open-minded, and did not treat the new disciples with an air of arrogance. Overall, he was a pretty decent person. Xavier waved his hand, smiling as he said, "I'm usually cultivating in the arcane wizardry peak. If you have any problems in the future, you may come and find me." He shot a glance at the building, before he continued in a low voice, "Ian and I are pretty much at each other's necks all the time. He's definitely not happy that we made him cough up first-class disciple quota. Although he won't dare to go overboard, the competition between the new disciples will indeed be very intense. You should take note, those who were selected from the various continents will not be ordinary individuals. In fact, even in the past batches, there was no lack of first-class disciples who had their status stolen." Xavier cautioned, however, "Don't feel restricted because of this. There's no need to show any courtesy to those who come looking for trouble. As long as it's within the rules, even if the matter blows up all the way to the sect master, Honorable Divine Demon, he will give the owner of this token some face." Ezra Zephyr nodded his head, indicating that he understood the advice. Xavier spoke a little more, before waving his hands at the prince as he rose into the sky on green smoke, disappearing into the many mountains in the blink of an eye. As he watched his leaving figure, the prince let out a long sigh. He gazed upon the now unfamiliar surroundings, knowing that he would be staying here for a long period of time. Because this place would allow him to grow even stronger. Many things had changed during this time. But Ezra Zephyr also understood that the true challenge had perhaps only just begun. To find a place for himself in such an enormous sect would likely be harder than he imagined. Fortunately, he was not alone. He brought his mini army with him. His goal was not to grow strong only, but to conquer the whole of the sect one day. The Prince of Werewolves raised his head to the sky, light shining down on his youthful face as he smiled a smile of dazzling confidence. So what if it was the Spirit Devouring Mountain? So what if the competition will be intense? Even the despair from back then had not crushed him. What was now in comparison? "I should go now," muttered the werewolf prince, before he took the steps and walked towards the giant bustling plaza. The giant plaza was already flooded by a sea of people. A quick glance would reveal that they were all pretty young, each individual in high spirits and overflowing with youthful vitality. The atmosphere was boiling with excitement. Gathered here were the numerous geniuses from the various continents in Lower Realm. Even so, they were still clearly gathered into distinct circles. The most attention-grabbing was the area at the very front of the plaza, where groups of all sizes could be seen. The main similarity was that at the center of each circle was a proud-looking young man or lady. Powerful spiritual energy spread from their bodies, far surpassing those beside them. "Over here, Your Majesty." When Ezra returned to the plaza, a familiar voice was heard nearby. "Gil." Subzi's eye-grabbing round body was beckoning at them. The prince walked over. Besides Gil Subzi were several figures. They were the Bloodfang martial masters and Naren continent geniuses, including Sinzudin. However, at this current time, these illustrious geniuses in the Naren continent had begun to appear a little unnatural. They could sense that the superiority they were originally proud of was now completely gone. Practically all of them had turned from a genius to an ordinary person. It was because of this sudden unease and loss that they involuntarily converged towards Ezra Zephyr when they saw him. Sinzudin had a complicated expression as he followed at the very end of the group, not daring to meet Ezra's gaze. "Your Majesty, Spirit Devouring Mountain is amazing indeed. There are over 10,000 new disciples here, each and everyone a genius from the various continents." Gil Subzi looked at the surroundings in amazement. "I just found out that there will be about 100 first-class disciples in this batch." Zhou Yuan was slightly taken aback. 100 first-class disciples? Didn't that mean that all of these individuals possessed the strength similar to the third level of the core formation stage? What an eye-opener. Ezra sighed inwardly. As expected, he would only be able to see such a grand lineup here. However, Ezra Zephyr was also surprised that Gil Subzi could gather such information in such a short span of time. The latter's smiling and friendly appearance was indeed a great tool for approaching and getting friendly with others. He will be the most important tool. His social mingling skills surpassed that of the Regale Arms. Within these 100 or so, there must be our mega genius prince of mighty Bloodfang Kingdom. Gil Subzi grinned widely as he said, "I hope that Your Majesty will take extra care of his subject in future." Ezra could not help but giggle when he heard this. However, just as he was about to speak, a voice suddenly interjected. "What is this? How can a first-level core formation stage practitioner become a first-class disciple? You guys are treating this matter too lightly." The sudden interjection stunned the group. Their gazes turned, and found a figure looking at them nearby. It was a slightly handsome young man. He had a smile on his face, while a group crowded around him like stars to the moon. Spiritual energy rippled from the young man's body, revealing that he had reached the second level of core formation stage. When the young man saw Ezra Zephyr and gang look over, a carefree smile immediately appeared on his face. "I am Levo, from the Galassi continent." The young man bowed a little with a smile. "We can be said to all be fellow disciples in future, so we should keep an eye out for each other." He seemed to offhandedly mention, "I should be rated at a second-class disciple this time, and if I work hard in the future, I should have a chance at becoming a first-class disciple." Several individuals at the young man's side began to flatter, "Hee, getting acquainted with Brother Levo is your fortune." Dur and Rest secretly chuckled inside, but Argus and Gil laughed wholeheartedly, shocking everyone. That Levo may seem like a kind person on the surface, but the arrogance in his tone could not be concealed. Hence, the Naren continent residents looked at Exra, who then smiled as he shook his head and said, "We're the residents of Naren continent that you are standing on. As for looking out for each other, there's really no need." Levo was clearly stunned that Ezra had actually rejected him. The former had obviously never expected that this group would reject him, causing his expression to turn a little rigid. His followers frowned and said, "What an unappreciative brute. To be recognized by Brother Luo is your blessing, don't be so muddle-headed." There were also several pretty good-looking young ladies amongst them who disdainfully glanced at Ezra Zephyr. They clearly felt that his actions were not tactful at all. After all, a first-level core formation stage was really too unremarkable, and had no right to put on airs. Your Majesty, allow me to kill these mongrels. Meanwhile, dozens of martial masters, including their Gale Arms and Gale Subzi, were holding a giant brute. Let me go. I'll break their fricking skulls. How dare they talk to our prince that way? The brute was Argus Waska. Levo saw that all and let out a dry laugh. He had to show gracefulness in front of his people after all. Hence, he waved his hand and gave Ezra Zephyr a deep look as he said, "My friend, this maybe is your continent but Spirit Devouring Mountain isn't, so it would be better for you to behave properly such as to avoid suffering. Hee, if you guys change your mind in the future, you can always come and find me." Fury flashed in Levo's eyes when he saw Ezra Zephyr and their Gale Arms intimately conversing in hushed voices, completely ignoring his existence. Just as he was about to speak again, a gong suddenly sounded across the plaza. They watched as Ian slowly walked out on a tall stage as his nonchalant voice echoed across the entire place. Everyone quiet. I will be announcing the classes of the new disciples. When Yin's voice spread across the plaza, the originally noisy plaza instantly became quiet, every gaze nervously looking towards the stone stage. Although the youngsters present were the geniuses from the various continents, they clearly understood that with the exception of a few special monsters, everyone else would become ordinary. When compared to their status and rank in the past, it would be a drop of 1,000 feet. In the Spirit Devouring Mountain, they would experience competition that they had never experienced before. To raise one's status, one needed to work hard to raise one's strength. It was obvious that those who became first-class disciples in the first disciple evaluation would undoubtedly gain several advantages. Under the attention of countless gazes, Ian waved the booklet in his hand and said, "There will be a total of 148 first-class disciples for this evaluation, 1,056 second-class disciples, and 9,500 third-class disciples." These words immediately caused the plaza to stir restlessly. Ezra was somewhat surprised. There were over 10,000 geniuses from the various continents, and yet only slightly over 100 were able to become first-class disciples. From this, one could see just how valued a first-class disciple quota was. The people at Levo's side continued to sing his praises. "Can't believe there will only be 1,000 second-class disciples. Brother Levo is indeed the best amongst the Galassi continent geniuses." A meaningful smile was revealed on Levo's face as he waved his hand and said, "It's only a second-class disciple, I still need to strive harder to become a first-class disciple. When that time comes, I will have the chance to see how amazing the legendary spiritual food is." The gazes of the group around him were filled with envy, some of the better-looking young ladies even constantly casting flirtatious glances at him. Next, I shall be announcing the list of first-class disciples. On the tall stage, Ian indifferently said, "Those whose names have been called, come forward to receive your disciple tokens. Shurian Continent, Drake Tubble." The first name immediately caused a disturbance on the plaza. The prince and the rest watched as a youth in white flew onto the stage. It was as if his face had been sculptured, giving off a bold and striking sensation. Powerful spiritual energy seemed to ripple from his body, making him feel intimidating even when he was not angry. Drake seemed to be pretty famous, his appearance causing several girls to shriek. Ezra also looked towards the youth in white called Drake Tubble, as his eyes widened slightly. He could indeed feel a faint feeling of danger from the latter's body. This individual was definitely not weak. Beside Ezra's group, Levo sighed loudly as he said, "Drake is said to be from the Tubble family of the Shurian continent. He has a powerful background and is extremely talented. He will surely be one of the core members of the Spirit Devouring Mountain in the future." Levo looked at Ezra and his gang as he nonchalantly said, "I even talked with him 2 days ago, so we at least recognize each other by face." Someone at his side quickly started the bootlicking again. "I heard that Drake is extremely proud, and ordinary people won't even enter this eyes. The fact that Brother Levo was able to speak with him is truly amazing." The martial masters from Bloodfang and other Naren continents residents could not help but exchange a look with each other and pondered. Are these people idiots? Was talking to someone really something you should be proud of? In truth, Levo knew he was a weak one, a dim star in vast sky. That's why he was gathering a lot of forces. When he saw such a large group of low martial prowess, he attempted to impress them into following him. However, he failed miserably. Though Levo's narcissism was rather loathsome, the information he revealed was committed to memory by the prince. Ryan Continent, Ravina in Gale. A stunning fiery red figure nimbly leaped onto the stage. When the crowd looked over, the gazes of numerous males were immediately lit with burning desire, because the one that had appeared on the stage was a young lady in red. The young lady's skin was akin to snow, while her face seemed as if it was painted. Her long, slender legs were relatively attention-grabbing, and it was hard to turn away from the sight of her sexy figure. A heroic aura seemed to sprout from the young lady in red, while the long red whip that hung on her slender waist only accentuated it even further. This girl is called Ravina, and is said to be related to one of the high-ranking personnel in the Spirit Devouring Mountain. She is very strong and pretty, and no one knows how many have tried to gain her favor. Though she is beautiful, she is extremely fond of battle, so it will be rather troublesome if you offend her. Names continued to be read during the next 10 minutes as extraordinary young men and women ascended the stage to receive the highest rank status token under the envious eyes of the crowd. In the blink of an eye, over 100 people had ascended the stage. A look of thought could be seen on Ezra Zephyr's face as he watched from below. He had realized that half of the 100 first-class disciples were from the Shurian continent and its rival Ryan continent. The Shurian and Ryan continent truly is blessed by the spiritual energy. Ezra Zephyr secretly sighed in his heart, because his and his kingdom's rise is solely a cheat, but these two continents were naturally blessed. The geniuses from the other continents were already a step behind in comparison. Catching up would not be easy. One name after another continued to sound out, and the list soon approached its end. On the stage, Ian glanced at the booklet, mockery lifting from the corners of his mouth as he said, "Next is the last first-class disciple also from the Naran continent, Ezra Zephyr." Ezra Zephyr understood the former's intentions from his gaze. However, the prince's expression did not change as he began to walk forward. The corners of Levo's eyes twitched frantically, while the followers around him looked to each other. What is he going to do? He can't be Ezra Zephyr, right? While they were still stuck in their disbelief, Ezra had already passed through the crowd, expression calm as he walked onto the stage and received the status token under the crowd's stares. When he stood on the stage, the entire plaza fell silent for an instant. A split second later, bewildered voices exploded, filling the sky. First level of core formation stage? Such strength has the qualifications to become a first-class disciple? How can this be? A first level of core formation is a first-class disciple? What kind of joke is this? A sky of doubtful voices surged like a flood. If even he can become a first-class disciple, why can't we? Questioning voices swept across the sky and land. Practically everyone present was filled with indignation when they saw this. Those evaluated as second-class disciples in particular were extremely unhappy. Even they with second and third level had not been evaluated as first class, so why did a first-level core formation guy get it? The third-class disciples were even more envious and jealous, their eyes practically tinged red. Only the high and mighty first-class disciples merely watched with the cold eyes of a bystander. However, their gazes were not too friendly when they looked towards the Prince of Bloodfang Kingdom, as if a dirty dog had somehow entered the ranks of tigers and leopards. The young man in white called Drake merely watched with an uncaring gaze. He only glanced at the werewolf once, before withdrawing his eyes, clearly paying no heed to this matter. On the stage, Ezra Zephyr's expression remained calm in the face of the numerous questioning voices. Eldarine wore a smile on his face. Only after the voices faded somewhat did he extend a hand to indicate for everyone to be quiet as he said, "This new disciple's situation is a little different. There's an esteemed ancient rule that has made it possible for him." These words first silenced the plaza, before they burst out into an even greater uproar. So he got in through the back door. Numerous new disciples shook their heads and sighed, disdain flowing out on their faces. Although they too wished deep down that they could be in the same situation, when it happened to someone else, they could not help but begin mocking. Dressed in red, the slender, sexy Ravina in Gale had initially been interested to know how a first-level core formation stage practitioner could become a first-class disciple. After hearing Yin's words, however, her red lips curled downward slightly. She shook her head in disappointment as her eyes turned away, no longer giving Ezra any further attention. On the stage, Yin waved his hand at Ezra Zephyr and said with a wide grin, "All right, you can go now." The prince indifferently glanced at the former. How could he not know that this was done on purpose? However, he did not say anything because it was true that he did appear to be a first-level core formation expert on the surface, a fact that would draw criticism regardless of when he became a first-class disciple. The only way to deal with such criticism was to prove oneself, something he would naturally have a chance to do in the future. Hence, he directly returned to his original spot under numerous watching gazes. The nearby group of Levo and gang returned to their senses at this moment. With a hollow laugh, he put on a fake smile as he said to Ezra and his gang, "I did not expect this friend to have such solid measure. However, you'll only end up losing out in the end. Not many disciples will be willing to come into contact with you in the future." The crowd around him nodded. Although they were envious inside, they righteously criticized Ezra for pulling strings, such as having a token. The martial masters of Naren continent frowned because at that place Ezra was not only the prince of Bloodfang Kingdom but also the face of Naren continent's geniuses. Disrespect to him means disrespect to Naren continent's geniuses. Ezra finally turned his sight towards Levo and uttered, "Scram." White and green interlaced on their faces, but they did not dare to say anything in the end. Ezra was after all a first-class disciple. Levo shot a look of hatred at Ezra Zephyr before leaving in embarrassment. On the stage, Yin faced the still clamoring crowd and said in a nonchalant voice, "There is no need for any of you to grumble. The Spirit Devouring Mountain's rules are fair, and will not be biased towards anyone. If you cannot accept this result, feel free to challenge them. A first-class disciple may not be fixed forever. If one is incapable, he or she will naturally be replaced. So, don't be relieved just because you became a first-class disciple. The right path is still to continue training hard." Yin's words made several disciples begin to stir as several malicious gazes were cast in Ezra's direction. If one was to consider who would be the easiest to replace amongst the over 100 first-class disciples present, the answer was pretty obvious. Elder Yin ignored the crowd's response as he continued to speak. "Starting now, you will be training here for the next 3 months, after which will be the peak selection ceremony. Only those that pass the ceremony and enter the 7 peaks as Outer Mountain disciples can be truly considered disciples of the Spirit Devouring Mountain. Those that fail will become Internee Mountain disciples, and may also enter the 7 peaks if the contribution conditions are met." The hearts of the numerous new disciples shivered. Those that could enter the Spirit Devouring Mountain were naturally prideful geniuses. Hence, failing to enter the 7 peaks would be a tremendous blow to them. Your accommodation can be found on the disciple token. From tomorrow onwards, every disciple will begin training in Energy Mountain. It is a specially constructed cultivation paradise of the Spirit Devouring Mountain, so you better grasp this chance well. Yin's words caused another surge of noise to wash over the plaza. Desire rose in the eyes of the other continent's geniuses, clearly already aware of what it was, especially the geniuses of Shurian and Ryan continents. The geniuses from the other weaker continents were at a loss, and could only humbly seek help. Thus, several of the Shurian and Ryan geniuses looked towards the other continent geniuses as if they were looking at country bumpkins, and said with an air of superiority, "You guys don't even know of Energy Mountain?" Energy Mountain is a type of martial prowess haven created by the Spirit Devouring Mountain. It's shaped like a volcano with a spiritual rune boundary carved on its insides to absorb spiritual energy, which is then purified by several spiritual rune boundaries, causing the spiritual energy that spouts out to be so much more pure. The most wonderful aspect of Energy Mountain is the blooming spirit flower planted on every cultivation platform. One only needs to feed spirit jade to this blooming spirit flower, and it will draw out the spiritual energy in the mountain and send it spouting out. The spiritual energy from the blooming spirit flower is not only purer than normal, but also contains some of its essences that can continuously temper the flowing chi or mana in the body. It can be said to be a cultivation treasure. The numerous new disciples from the other continents were confused. Although they sounded very amazing, what exactly were these spirit jade and blooming spirit flower? Spirit jade is an item manufactured by the Spirit Devouring Mountain. You may treat it as a substitute for spiritual crystals, though it can only be used in the sect. One can exchange spirit jade for many items, pills, weapons, or spiritual crystals. Eldarine opened his mouth to speak at this moment. You new disciples will receive 30 spirit jade pieces at the beginning of every month. The spirit jade pieces for this month have already been placed in your quarters. As for Energy Mountain, you will naturally understand when you train tomorrow. He waved his hand and said, everyone should go find their living quarters. After speaking, he turned around and left in an unhurried manner. The plaza turned into a chaotic mess as numerous disciples began to scatter around, using the instructions on the token to search for their living quarters. Ezra Zephyr and the masters of Naren continent also followed the instructions, passing through the verdant mountain, before ultimately coming to a stop at the rear of the mountain. At the waist of the mountain stood exquisite little house after house, powerful spiritual energy pulsing in the surroundings. Behind the prince, their Galarm sighed and remarked, Your Majesty, the first-class disciple treatment really is countless times better than second-class disciples like us. Perhaps for the new disciples to better look out for each other, the Spirit Devouring Mountain had temporarily grouped the geniuses from the same continent together. There were Galarms, Zulfi Dimitri, Argus Waska, Shifa Pista, Gil Subzi, and Sinzutun with the rest of Naren continent's geniuses were situated at the foot of the mountain nearby. All of the Naren continent martial masters were selected as third-class disciples. With the exception of those who entered Spirity Tower, they got second class. However, their living quarters were what seemed to be a series of joined little huts that looked rather simplistic. Compared to Ezra Zephyr's, the difference was pretty vast. The others nodded one after another, envy filling their eyes. They were geniuses that had lived a life of luxury in the past. Now, however, their living standards had fallen drastically, and it was going to be pretty hard to get used to. Ezra looked at the people in front and said in a serious tone, I want you all in first class, but the seats are limited. So, either be in first class or second class. I will not back anyone who failed my expectation. As for materials to grow, I will give you all I have. He looked at other geniuses of Naren and continued. We are on the same boat now, so be obedient and you will reach the sky under my guidance, I assure you. Everybody nodded, including Sinzutun, who once opposed him. After that the atmosphere became tense, the prince chuckled and comforted them a little. Before beginning to climb up to the waist of the mountain, he saw a small house. After entering the house, Ezra Zephyr began to look around with some interest, finding the place very satisfactory. Most importantly, he had discovered the spiritual rune boundary in the little house that continuously collected the surrounding spiritual energy. Living in such a place for a long period would definitely be very beneficial to his martial prowess. On a table in the house, he saw a cloth bag which he picked up and shook, causing tinkling sounds to emerge. He reached in and grabbed a strip of jade that was the size of a baby's fist. The clear jade sparkled as pure spiritual energy spread from it. The prince curiously mumbled to himself, Is this a spirit jade piece? Everything here felt so fresh. Ezra Zephyr arrived at the balcony on the second floor as warm sunlight sprinkled down and bathed his body. It felt extremely comfortable. The prince closed his eyes in enjoyment for a brief moment, before he suddenly felt a gaze look towards him from far away. He looked over, only to see another little house on the right. A pretty figure in red gracefully stood on the balcony, her slender and sexy figure made even more apparent when she leaned against the railing. It was Ravina in Gale. Upon sensing Ezra's gaze, Ravina frowned slightly before turning around and entering the house. She clearly did not approve of this first-class disciple that had pulled strings to obtain his status. The Prince of Werewolves merely chuckled upon seeing this, unbothered by her attitude. Eldarine sat on a chair as he calmly took a sip of tea. Before him stood a young man in blue, with a respectful expression. His face was ordinary, but his eyes appeared a little devious, somewhat similar to a wolf. "Eldarine, you were the one who agreed that I would get a first-class disciple quota," said the young man in blue with a pained face. Ian waved his hand and replied, "I too did not expect things to turn out this way." Xavier forcibly shoved someone in. Ian indifferently said, "Hee, don't worry Peliok. I was the one at fault this time. I will return everything." The youth in blue called Peliok hurriedly said, "How can I take back the gifts I've given Eldarine?" Ian nodded in admiration. He lightly tapped the table as he said, "Although Eldar has become a first-class disciple, it's not like you don't have any chance at all. According to the rules, competition is encouraged amongst the new disciples. You are currently at the second level of core formation, while Ezra Zephyr is merely at the first level of core formation. You only need to find a chance to challenge him, and once you succeed, you will naturally replace him as a first-class disciple. Tomorrow will be good. That kid will have already enjoyed a night in the little house, so he will not be overly unhappy even if beaten back to where he belongs." Joy immediately flitted across Peliok's eyes when he heard this. "Does Eldarine mean that?" Ian glanced at the former and said, "If you defeat him in front of everyone, I will take away his first-class disciple status and transfer it to you." Peliok was over the moon. "Thank you for the advice, Eldarine." In his opinion, Ezra would not be any problem as long as he had Yin's approval. To Peliok, it was just too easy to deal with a first-level expert. Ian grinned widely as he waved his hand. Upon seeing this, Peliok tactfully withdrew. Ian toyed with the cup in his hand as he watched the former leave. He chuckled to himself as he said, "Ezra is not tactful at all. I've already waited for a good half of the day. If he had voluntarily come to offer me generous gifts, I may have sheltered a little. Unfortunately, he's just too stupid. Although it isn't appropriate for me to personally go after you, if you are eliminated in accordance with the rules, even the two elders above me won't have anything to say." In the Outer Mountains, beside himself as the manager, there were 2 Outer Mountain elders. However, these 2 elders usually did not give any attention to such matters. Hence, it could be said that Ian was the greatest authority in the Outer Mountains.